It all began on a warm spring afternoon in late May 2011. Alyssa decided to go fishing alone along the Platte River. She packed her gear and drove out to the Platte Falls Conservation Area, a serene spot with a boat ramp that locals often visited when they needed peace and quiet. The next day, June Unst, a man taking his lunch break near the conservation area, was walking along the riverbank when he noticed something unusual in the shallows. What he found would send shockwaves through Platte County. Stranded on the shore and partially submerged in the water was the body of a woman, wearing only a bikini top. The body was later identified as that of Alyssa Faye Shippert, 22. When authorities arrived, it was immediately clear this was no accident. The scene bore signs of violence. Deputies noted severe trauma to Alyssa's head, blood on the ground, and even bone fragments scattered near the bank, suggesting a brutal attack had taken place, just steps from where she'd been fishing. From that moment, the Platte County Sheriff's Office launched one of the most unsettling investigations the region had faced in years. Just upstream, her car sat untouched at the boat ramp. Her fishing gear was still nearby, as if she had simply stepped away. News of Alyssa's death spread quickly through Platte City, a town where most people knew each other by name and family roots stretched back generations. The questions came just as quickly. Who could have done this? Why here, in such a familiar place? And most painfully, why Alyssa? Alyssa had grown up in Platte City. After high school, she hadn't followed the traditional college track, but instead chose hard work and independence, holding a cashier job at Casey's General Store. But work was only part of her life. She loved fishing, especially along the Platte River. To those who knew her, it was more than just a hobby. It reflected her personality. By the morning of the 1st of June, 2011, the Platte Falls Conservation Area was as peaceful as ever. 2,300 acres of woods, trails, and water managed by the Missouri Department of Conservation. But that serenity shattered when deputies secured the scene where Alyssa's body was found. They quickly established a perimeter, marking off the muddy riverbank where the attack had clearly taken place. The evidence spoke of a sudden and violent confrontation that left a young woman's life cut short, and a community desperate for answers. When reported about the incident, medical personnel arrived quickly at the scene. The county medical examiner pronounced Alyssa dead on site. Early observations pointed to blunt force trauma as the likely cause of her injuries. Her identity wasn't immediately clear. No wallet, no phone, no form of identification was found with the body. Deputies began cross-checking local missing person reports, and it didn't take long for a lead to surface. Alyssa Faye Shippert had already been reported missing the night before when she failed to return home or answer calls from her family. The description, along with her vehicle records, matched. Dental records and forensic testing would later confirm it beyond doubt. The body pulled from the Platte River was Alyssa. With that confirmation, the investigation shifted into high gear. Sheriff Richard Anderson and the Platte County Sheriff's Office mobilized detectives and crime scene technicians. They treated the riverbank like a grid, photographing and mapping every section. Evidence, from bone fragments to trace material, was carefully collected and bagged. Search teams spread into the surrounding woods, while divers from the Missouri State Highway Patrol scoured the riverbed for anything the current might have carried away. The conservation area itself became part of the investigation. Trails and parking lots were checked for tire impressions, discarded items, or any clue of suspicious activity. Rangers who patrolled the area were questioned, but no one had reported anything unusual in the days prior. Based on environmental factors, the spring temperatures and the river's steady, but not flooded current, investigators estimated the body had been in the water overnight. That detail suggested Alyssa may have entered the river near the boat ramp not far from where she was found. At a press conference, officials released only limited details. They urged the public to come forward with tips and set up a dedicated hotline through Greater Kansas City Crime Stoppers, Anonymous callers could even qualify for a reward. Meanwhile, the medical examiner transported Alyssa's body to the morgue for a full autopsy. Preliminary findings confirmed what the scene already suggested. Her head injuries were extensive, the result of violent force. Toxicology and other tests would refine the timeline of her death. Back at the lab, forensic teams worked with what little evidence they had from the riverbank. The current had washed away much of the DNA, leaving few biological traces behind. With physical evidence limited, investigators turned to Alyssa's world, the people who knew her, and the life she had lived. Alyssa's father described her as a kind-hearted daughter who had just cut her long hair to donate to cancer patients and was preparing to help tornado victims in Joplin. Alyssa's sister remembered her as a free spirit with a radiant personality who loved nature and cherished her relationships. Nothing in her background hinted at conflicts, grudges, or enemies. For detectives, that painted a troubling picture. If Alyssa wasn't the type to make enemies, then who had wanted to hurt her? Investigators next turned their attention to Alyssa's social circle. Friends described her as easygoing, deeply connected to her church, and focused on a simple routine of work, family, and time outdoors. The detectives probed her love life, asking if she had been seeing anyone or had been under any stress recently. Nothing stood out. At her workplace, Casey's General Store in Platte City, co-workers shared a common image of Alyssa as kind, approachable, and often mentoring new employees. She enjoyed chatting with customers and never mentioned any conflicts. Several colleagues remembered her talking about her fishing trip that day, excited for a few quiet hours on the riverbank. No one recalled hearing about arguments or threats. Despite interviews and repeated reviews of her phone records, the investigation stalled. Summer faded into fall, with no major breakthroughs. The autopsy confirmed Alyssa had suffered devastating blunt force trauma, consistent with a heavy object. But without the murder weapon, detectives had little to anchor their case. Then, in the early hours of the 26th of December, 2011, everything changed. Around 4 o'clock a.m., deputies were called to an apartment in Farrellview, about 10 miles from Platte City. Inside, they found a 21-year-old woman brutally attacked with a razor. Her abdomen had been slashed open. Though unconscious, she was rushed to the hospital and miraculously survived. When she regained consciousness on the 30th of December, she identified her attacker as a man she knew casually, a name that stunned investigators: Quentin Odell. Quentin was no stranger to the case. He had worked with Alyssa at the same convenience store, blending into the small-town community without raising suspicion. In fact, he had even been inside Alyssa's family home, chatting with her father on occasion. With no prior criminal record, his name surfacing in connection to such a violent attack shocked both detectives and locals alike. Detectives brought him in for questioning on the 5th of January and 6th, 2012. What Quentin told them left even seasoned investigators shaken. He admitted that on the afternoon of May 31st, 2011, he had gone to the Platte River and encountered Alyssa while she was fishing. According to his statement, he entered the water and pretended to drown, luring her closer. When she approached, a confrontation broke out. Quentin described how both of them reached for the small hatchet he carried on his belt. He struck Alyssa in the back of the head, causing her to collapse, crying in pain. Then, in chilling detail, he admitted kneeling down and striking her repeatedly in the face with the hatchet until she stopped moving. Afterward, he dragged her body into the river before heading back home, where he showered and went to bed as if nothing had happened. In another version of events, Quentin claimed Alyssa had angered him during their encounter, triggering a sudden outburst of violence. He framed the killing as an impulsive act rather than premeditation. Prosecutors, however, saw it differently. The very fact that he carried a hatchet and used it so deliberately spoke to intent. In late December, at the Federal View Apartments, Quentin admitted visiting the 21-year-old woman, his lover, on the 26th. During his first interview with investigators, he insisted he had left her alive and injured her. But in a later statement, his story shifted. He claimed he overheard her arguing on the phone with a recent boyfriend, which set him off. According to Quinton, he grabbed a razor blade from the kitchen table, then left the apartment. He said he went home and only realized the next morning that his hands and shirt were stained with dried blood. He admitted to quickly discarding the shirt. This version of events, however, was far from complete. After his confession linked him to both incidents, authorities moved quickly. On the 7th of January, 2012, Quinton, then 22, was formally charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action in Alyssa's case, along with related charges for the December attack on the woman. 21. Later, in June 2012, prosecutors filed additional charges tied to the Fairview assault, including forcible, intimate connected to a deviant abuse act during the razor attack. The 21-year-old victim had survived, and her statements, combined with forensic evidence, confirmed the assault. Bond was set at $2 million, underscoring the gravity of the crimes, and Quinton was held in custody. In Alyssa's case, no abuse charges were filed. Her autopsy determined the cause of death to be multiple blunt force injuries to the head, with no evidence of abuse assault. Quinton confessed that their confrontation escalated, leading him to strike her with a hatchet before dragging her body into the river. Alyssa's body was later found partially clothed, wearing only a bikini top. Investigators noted that she had gone fishing on a warm spring day, likely wearing swimwear for comfort. The missing lower garments were never fully explained, possibly lost during the struggle or carried away by the current. Prosecutor Eric Zond sought the death penalty, arguing that the brutality of the crimes, combined with Quinton's betrayal of Alyssa's kindness, demanded the harshest punishment under Missouri law. The state painted Quinton as a predator who followed a pattern of calculated violence. Meanwhile, Quinton's defense team fought to save him from execution. They pointed to his lack of a criminal record and framed his actions as reactive rather than premeditated, particularly the fatal struggle by the river. They pushed for a plea deal, warning that emotional testimony during a jury trial could easily tip the scale toward death. Their strategy worked. On the 24th of January, 2013, Quintin P. Odell appeared in Platte County Circuit Court and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, 2 counts of armed criminal action, first-degree assault, and abuse. In exchange, prosecutors agreed to drop their pursuit of the death penalty. Quinton was sentenced to life without parole for murder, plus consecutive sentences totaling 100 years for the other crimes. At his sentencing, Quinton apologized to both victims and their families. The judge accepted the plea deal and handed down the sentence, ensuring Quinton would spend the rest of his life behind bars in a Missouri state prison. Faenza, an Italian city of roughly 50,000 people, is known for its relaxed atmosphere. Many residents have close relationships built on familiarity and trust. But in early 2021, an event involving Ilenia Fabbri severely damaged that sense of trust, especially among those who knew her. On February 6, 2021, at dawn, police received a call from a young girl reporting an attack on her mother at their home in a residential area. Arriving at the villa, officers and paramedics found the front doors open. Inside, they discovered the body of Ilenia Fabbri, 46. On the ground floor, she had a severe cut to her throat, along with multiple cuts on her body and head injuries, indicating she had been struck with a blunt object. At first, investigators thought the crime was a robbery that turned violent when Ilenia interrupted the burglar and resisted. But as they examined the crime scene and Ilenia's injuries more closely, the robbery theory seemed less probable. The violence used was too extreme for a typical robbery. suggesting Ilenia was intentionally targeted. The community was shocked and saddened by the news of the tragedy. Ilenia, known as a positive, friendly, and well-liked wife and mother, was highly regarded by everyone. She had many friends, acquaintances, and had worked for years as a secretary at her husband's car dealership. Concerned residents cooperated with the investigation, hoping to find the person responsible, ensure justice, and make their streets safe again. Ilenia seemed like the least likely person to be targeted by such violence. Initially, investigators found no obvious suspects among her close contacts, or at least very few. Seeking to uncover the mystery and identify the killer, detectives began meticulously examining Ilenia's life. They soon learned that she and Claudio Nani had divorced some time before. But their legal battles continued. Over the years, disagreements, exacerbated by financial issues, had strained their marriage. Ilenia, who had worked full-time in the business, believed Claudio had taken advantage of her. After the divorce, she sought substantial compensation, which he resisted, determined to leave her with nothing. Their conflict escalated into a lawsuit, and Claudio further aggravated the situation by attempting to prove his wife's alleged infidelity. He even placed a GPS tracker on her car, hoping to document her movements. But he couldn't prove anything. Ilenia quickly suspected something and discovered the device. She then filed a complaint alleging stalking and invasion of privacy, which only fueled their animosity. Claudio was the main suspect. Police investigated where he was when Ilenia was murdered. He was with his daughter, Arianna Nanni, at his house, which was near Ilenia's villa. Arianna said she arrived early that morning because they were driving to Osnago, Lecco, to get a new car. She confirmed that her father was with her the whole time and didn't leave the house. They had breakfast, and about 30 minutes later, they drove to a nearby city, a few kilometers into their trip. Arianna received an urgent phone call. Besides Arianna's statement, Claudio's phone records, including text messages and location data, supported his alibi, making it seem impossible for him to have committed the murder. Even though he had a strong reason to want Ilenia dead, it looked like he couldn't have done it. Communication with Claudio and Arianna allowed investigators to reconstruct part of the events. They were not far from the city when Arianna received a call from Arianna's friend, who reported that something bad was happening at Ilenia's house. According to him, screams were heard coming from the villa. By coincidence, Arianna's friend had been looking out the window and noticed a large, unfamiliar man entering the property. He looked threatening. Hearing about this, Arianna didn't want to continue the trip and insisted on returning home. It seemed to her that even Claudio was worried. She insisted that they both go back and find out what was happening. At the same time, Arianna kept in touch with her friend on the phone. The girl was very worried about her mother and asked the police to check the house. It took several minutes for Claudio's car to drive up to the villa at full speed. When talking to the police, Arianna repeatedly said that her father was also acting very worried and seemed anxious to find out what was going on. He stopped the car, got out, and went into the house, but ordered his daughter to stay in the car and not to get out under any circumstances. Arianna heard her mother's screams and couldn't restrain herself. She ran out of the car and across the courtyard. Along the way, she dialed the emergency number and called the police, something Claudio hadn't done. Just a few meters from the front door, the screams in the house stopped. When Arianna went inside, she saw her mother lying in a pool of blood, her throat deeply cut. Claudio wouldn't allow his daughter to remain at the crime scene. He took her outside to the car, where they waited for the police to arrive. Even when the carabinieri arrived, Arianna was shaking and hysterical, so shocked by what she saw that she could barely speak. She needed psychological help and time to recover. A little later, they were able to interview her at the medical center. Meanwhile, law enforcement officers were working at the crime scene, carefully analyzing the robbery scenario. However, it almost immediately became untenable. Given the degree of brutality of the attack on Ilenia, the fact that she was chased throughout the entire house, as well as the fact that almost nothing was missing, also didn't align with the behavior of a robber. The strangest thing was that there was no sign of forced entry. This indicates that the attacker knows the door well or has his own key. Ylenia managed to reach the second floor, but there was no escape from there. There were signs of a struggle found on the upper floor. The first drops of blood were found in the bedroom, but she died on the first floor. In her attempt to escape, Ylenia splattered blood up the stairs and into several rooms. The killer caught up with her and finished her off on the lower floor. This also did not seem like the actions of a surprised robber. Having reconstructed the chronology of events, detectives began to focus on two main theories. Either the criminal knew Ylenia and attacked her out of hatred, or she was an accidental victim of someone under the influence of illegal substances or a deranged individual. Almost from the beginning, the police had a description of the killer. After interviewing neighbors, as well as Ariana's friend, several people reported seeing a man breaking into the villa. They all described him as a tall, strong figure dressed in black. Unfortunately, his face was covered by a hood, so a more detailed description was impossible. Faenza had many CCTV cameras, and, curiously, Ylenia's house was also equipped with a security system. However, by another strange coincidence, it was not working that day, making the crime look meticulously planned. One group of detectives analyzed Ylenia's inner circle to understand who might have harbored enough hatred to kill her in broad daylight. Early on, the name of her ex-husband kept surfacing, and suspicions against him grew. Despite his alibi, another group collected data from CCTV cameras throughout the area, analyzing hundreds of hours of video footage. Additionally, all mobile phone records and calls made near the villa that day were meticulously checked. Ylenia's ex-husband, Claudio, appeared to be involved once again, as a closer examination of their relationship revealed it had been toxic for many years. In fact, Ylenia had been subjected to severe emotional and physical abuse by her husband on a regular basis, and had repeatedly contacted law enforcement and filed complaints. The first of these complaints was dated 2017, but the domestic abuse likely began much earlier. The last time she went to the police was just a few days before finally leaving Claudio. Ylenia's friends and relatives said their relationship had been troubled for a long time, but Ylenia was reluctant to leave her husband for the sake of the child. She believed it was better to raise her daughter with both parents. However, the atmosphere in the house became so toxic that she gradually began to doubt this idea. She left him with a sense of great joy and liberation. From that moment on, she tried to completely sever all contact with Claudio, as he used every opportunity to harass her. The Carabinieri checked all leads and possible suspects, including Ariana. However, she was quickly eliminated as a suspect. As her father and mobile phone data confirmed her innocence, she had no motive and no disagreements with her mother. On the contrary, she was very worried about her. Ariana also didn't believe that her father could be involved. When she first heard the suggestion, she defended him, repeatedly stating that she was in a car with him a few kilometers from the villa when the attack took place. She pointed out that neither she nor her father fit the description of the attacker. The story that the father and daughter were going to Osnago, Lecco, to pick up a new car also proved true, as detectives contacted the dealership Claudio had mentioned, and the manager confirmed his story. However, according to witnesses to their relationship, Claudio was the only person in Ylenia's inner circle who had a real motive and the desire to kill. As a result, his calls were tapped and his car was bugged. The last one that could be tracked was made in December 2020. There was also correspondence in the messenger, but they had been deleted, and the data could not be restored. This immediately attracted the attention. It was a period of pandemic and lockdown, but Claudio was actively discussing some business with an unknown person. There were several suspicious messages with ambiguous content that the men sent to each other. The owner of the number was identified quite quickly as Pierluigi Barbieri. His background was analyzed, revealing a rather turbulent criminal past with several convictions, including for violent crime. It seemed strange that a man like Claudio, who had his own business, a daughter, and once had a beautiful wife, would associate with such a suspicious and shady character. Pierluigi was quickly located. Living not far from Elenia's house in Faenza, the police immediately apprehended him for questioning. The first thing they wanted to know was his whereabouts at the time of the crime and the day before. Outwardly, he resembled the attacker described by witnesses. Early on, the investigators had a strong feeling they were on the right track. Pierluigi was reluctant to cooperate and wouldn't confirm any connection to the murder. However, his answers were contradictory and ambiguous. He chose his words carefully and hesitated before answering each question, which only strengthened the suspicion against him. The interrogation lasted for hours, but the seasoned criminal knew how to behave under pressure and remained unyielding. They needed something concrete to corner him. Detectives analyzed Pierluigi's mobile phone data and quickly confirmed that he was in the vicinity of Elenia's home when the crime was committed. He left home early in the morning, heading towards Elenia's residence. Next, they reviewed surveillance camera footage from streets along his likely route. A person matching the description was recorded on a parallel street. They investigated the areas where this person in dark clothes might have walked and managed to identify him before he reached the house. The investigation also revealed that a white car had driven past the villa 2 or 3 times in the hours before the murder. The license plate was identified, and the vehicle was registered to Pierluigi Barbieri. While this reinforced their suspicion, none of the cameras captured a clear image of his face. Moreover, investigators believed he hadn't acted alone. They suspected Elenia's ex-husband was involved in the planning, possibly ordering the murder. With Pierluigi as the executor, at the time of his arrest, Pierluigi was a 51-year-old resident of Faenza, with a reputation for aggression and close ties to the criminal underworld. He had served a long prison sentence, released in August 2020, for robbing a hair salon. At trial, he claimed he committed the crime to pay off debts. But it was part of a pattern. The investigation uncovered a similar, but more brutal, incident. Pierluigi broke into the home of a disabled man, kidnapped him, and forced him to withdraw all his money from an ATM, breaking several of his fingers in the process. The victim didn't report the crime, intimidated and afraid. Given the circumstances of Elenia's death and these revelations, detectives believe he may have intentionally targeted Elenia. The attack occurred after Ariana left home with her father to ensure her safety and provide an alibi for Claudio. This was likely Claudio's goal to target only his wife while creating an alibi that protected the rest of the family. The multiple drives past the house by Pierluigi suggest he was waiting for a signal or confirming that only his target was inside. By this point, Claudio's involvement in his ex-wife's murder was virtually certain. They believed he orchestrated and instigated the crime, hiring Pierluigi as the killer. Therefore, they had to have met to discuss the plan and payment, continuing the search for an undeniable connection between Pierluigi and Claudio. Investigators discovered that meetings had taken place in Claudio's garage shortly before the murder. Eventually, Pierluigi Barbieri confessed and began to reveal disturbing details of the brutal attack. He admitted that Elenia's murder was not a robbery gone wrong. He had originally gone to her house as a hitman hired by her ex-husband, Claudio, who provided him with the keys and carefully laid out the instructions. It was a clear plan, meticulously planned down to the smallest detail. Claudio didn't want their daughter, Ariana, to suffer, but even she was part of his manipulation. Pierluigi and Claudio repeatedly discussed and refined the plan to ensure no delays. Unfortunately, there was no external confirmation of these discussions. Everything happened face to face, leaving no correspondence. The motive wasn't jealousy or hatred. Claudio simply didn't want to share money with his ex-wife. The idea of hiring a killer came when Elenia filed a lawsuit, demanding fair compensation for her years of work in his workshop. He had never paid her a proper salary, only providing sporadic handouts. As she described it, as a result, she sought approximately 500,000 euros in compensation. From that moment on, Alenia became a threat to his financial well-being. One he wanted to eliminate, Claudio approached Pierluigi, and they agreed on a price of 20,000 euros and a used car for the murder. As it turned out, this trip to Osnago, Lecco with Arianna, was not a gesture of paternal love. The cunning manipulator used his own daughter as a cover to establish his alibi. Pierluigi revealed another chilling detail. He wasn't supposed to use just any knife. Claudio provided it. It was a ceramic knife he had used to cut a cake the night before the murder. During a small anniversary celebration, after the crime, Pierluigi disposed of the knife. Despite detectives discovering the general location where it was discarded, it was never recovered. Early in the morning, as soon as Arianna left the villa with her father, Pierluigi knew that Alenia was alone. He calmly entered using the key, provided by Claudio. He expected she to still be asleep. This miscalculation led to their plan's partial failure. Alenia made a noise, attracting the attention of neighbors, and attempted to escape. Pierluigi pursued her upstairs to the bedroom. He initially attacked her with a hammer, striking her on the head. However, the blow was glancing, and Alenia managed to partially dodge it. Bleeding, she ran up the stairs to the second floor and locked herself in the bathroom. The door could not stop Pierluigi, who was holding the hammer. He broke it down. Alenia begged for mercy, but he struck her several more times on the head with the hammer, then began to strangle her. Still, she didn't give up. She screamed, fought back, and even managed to break free and run to the kitchen. Then, Pierluigi took out the knife Claudio had given him and began stabbing her repeatedly. The final, fatal blow was a deep cut to her throat. At that moment, the sound of wheels was heard outside. Arianna and Claudio are coming. Pierluigi simply left the house, overturning a few things along the way to stage a robbery. Naturally, this was not enough to fool the detectives. When the details of the crime became public, questions about the problem of femicide in Italy were once again raised. It was revealed that Alenia had contacted a domestic violence center in 2017, but her pleas were simply ignored. The police's inaction and the impunity enjoyed by Claudio only emboldened his behavior. Subsequent appeals also went unanswered until after the divorce. This led to a conversation about how deeply rooted violence against women is and the major political and societal changes needed to stop it. This sentiment was echoed by detectives and the judge at the subsequent trials. When the police questioned Claudio about the hired killer, he continued to insist on his innocence. During the interrogation, Claudio had an outburst of anger, which only confirmed their suspicions. He quickly cracked and confessed to hiring Pierluigi. However, Claudio claimed that he did not intend for her to be killed, but only wanted to intimidate his ex-wife so that she would drop her financial demands and withdraw her statement. Both criminals were sent to different prisons to await trial. From prison, Claudio wrote a letter to his daughter, Arianna, expressing his regret for what had happened. He claimed he didn't want to kill Alenia, only to scare her mother. Portraying it as a terrible accident, he claimed he simply chose the wrong person to carry out his plan. In the letter, he wrote that he was ashamed and wished he could disappear. Later, when Arianna was interviewed by journalists, she sided with Claudio, continuing to insist that he didn't want to kill Alenia. She likely simply couldn't believe it. However, the facts left no room for doubt, and as a result, Claudio Nani and Pierluigi Barbieri were convicted and found guilty of premeditated murder, as well as planning the crime and attempting to obstruct the investigation. Claudio Nani and Pierluigi Barbieri were sentenced to the maximum possible punishment for the charges brought against them: life imprisonment. The sentences were upheld at every level of the judicial system. In January 2024, the Court of Cassation put an end to the legal proceedings, recognizing it as a deliberate and heinous crime. Both men involved in the crime lost any chance of receiving a reduced sentence. Even so, Arianna never lost faith in her father. She continues to try to maintain a relationship with him in every possible way and has also made attempts to have the court's decision reviewed. However, All efforts have been to no avail. Claudio and Pierluigi were also sentenced to pay €2 million in moral damages to Arianna in a civil suit. On October 8, 2003, two fishermen were exploring the coast off Cape May, New Jersey, in their new boat. They hadn't gone far from shore when they noticed something suspicious in the water. Curious, they initially thought it might be a dead animal. As they approached, they realized it was a woman's body. The fishermen immediately contacted law enforcement. The deceased was pulled from the water, and an attempt was made to identify her. Unfortunately, there was no identifying information. She was wearing clothes, but had no identification or distinguishing marks. The victim appeared young, with detectives estimating her to be under 20. Although the time spent in the water made it difficult to be certain, her body was in a deplorable condition. Having been submerged for several days, water accelerates decomposition, and the young woman showed numerous signs of marine life activity. A stone crab was found on her body, consuming the inside of her thigh. According to the forensic expert who performed the autopsy, the body had been adrift for more than a week, possibly even 2. Sea creatures hadn't thoroughly damaged the soft tissues yet. A piece of a large chain was found on her ankles, and her limbs were bound with adhesive tape. There were also signs of a struggle on the body, and investigators suspected she had been abused. However, even a thorough DNA examination proved impossible. As the water had washed away all traces of the perpetrator, the forensic expert believed the body had been submerged for a considerable time, likely near the seabed. The girl had probably been drowned using some form of weight that eventually broke free. Unfortunately, identification of the victims remains limited. Special features and evidence should be carefully examined before being released to the public. Even at this early stage, investigators anticipated that identification would be difficult. The forensic expert continued to examine the body for any clues that might shed light on the mystery of the girl's death. He wanted to know who she was, how she died. No gunshot wounds, stab wounds, or cuts were found. However, a fracture was discovered at the base of her skull. The specialist concluded that the force of the blow that caused this was equivalent to a fall from a height of 5 stories. Investigators attempted to obtain fingerprints, but her extended submersion in water made this challenging. The skin was severely swollen, requiring further processing of her fingertips to obtain reliable prints. Once obtained, the prints were checked against law enforcement databases and matched to a resident of Dover, Delaware, a small town located near Cape May, approximately 60 kilometers away. The victim was identified as 16-year-old Kimberly Holton. 2 detectives assigned to the case immediately went to the house where the girl lived. Her mother, who was intoxicated, opened the door. The woman was unaware of her daughter's whereabouts, as Kimberly had been living with another couple for several years. Through the mother, investigators learned another address. Kimberly lived in a mobile home located in a trailer park. The girl's adoptive mother opened the door to the detectives. As soon as the woman saw the police, she immediately became alarmed, realizing their arrival was connected to Kimberly. She told the detectives everything she knew about the girl. Kimberly had been born on November 4, 1986, and was just short of her 17th birthday at the time of her death. She had a difficult life from the start. Born into a dysfunctional family, her father had been incarcerated for most of her life and was expected to remain imprisoned for a long time due to numerous criminal offenses. Her mother suffered from addiction to illegal substances and alcohol and had long been indifferent to the girl's fate. Some relatives tried to help her in any way they could but lacked the means to adopt her. Despite these challenges, teachers at school described Kimberly as friendly, intelligent, and calm. She loved animals and aspired to become a veterinarian due to her amiable nature. In 2001, some of her parents' distant relatives Ron Machette and Lorraine Machette, offered her a home in their trailer park. They had a daughter named Heather Nasakaitis, who had always wanted a sister. Thus, Machette managed to fulfill two dreams at once and helped Kimberly grow up in a more stable environment. Before moving in with Ron and Lorraine, Kimberly had been trying to find a better living situation. Away from her troubled parents, she even lived with her grandfather for a time, 2 years after moving in with her adoptive parents, who hadn't even formalized the adoption. Kimberly had died. According to Lorraine, she had last seen her adopted daughter 10 days before the police arrived at the trailer park, on September 29, 2003. This timeline confirmed the medical examiner's conclusion that the body had been in the water for a week or two. Lorraine also stated that she contacted law enforcement the day after Kimberly went missing. Lorraine explained that she wasn't particularly worried during the first few days of her disappearance, as it was normal for Kimberly, a teenager, to run away from home for a few days. Kimberly had done this many times before, often staying with friends for the weekend, but she would always return. It was thanks to this history that the girl was identified by fingerprints. Kimberly had been on the police database for a long time, simply because she had a tendency to run away from home. When Lorraine had gone to the police station to file a missing person report, the officer took the statement, wrote a report, and interviewed those closest to Kimberly. The policeman was interested in whether she had been seen, but he was unable to find any leads. Given her history of running away, the investigation into this case didn't receive enough attention. But time passed, and there was still no news from her until her body was found. It was immediately obvious that Lorraine was worried about Kimberly. Detectives decided to question Lorraine in more detail to understand Kimberly's relationship with those close to her. Investigators were interested in whether Kimberly could be connected to crime, whether she could have any enemies capable of such cruelty. First of all, they suspected Lorraine herself and her husband Ron, who were in the process of getting a divorce. 2 weeks before her disappearance, Kimberly had reported her adoptive father to the police, saying that he had gotten into bed with her and was molesting her. Lorraine confirmed these fears. According to Lorraine, she had noticed more than once that her husband was looking at Kimberly strangely. The act of molestation confirmed that he had an unhealthy attraction to children. His behavior was the reason for the divorce. After this story, suspicions about Ron only grew stronger. At first, Ron became the main suspect. They investigated him very thoroughly and found out he even had an alibi. Then, his words were confirmed. At the time of Kimberly's murder, he was behind bars. Since immediately after Kimberly's statements, he was arrested and charged with harassment. He spent several days in jail. At least during the time frame of the murder, Ron was cleared immediately. He clearly could not have been involved in the crime. The most significant challenge was the length of time the body had been submerged in the water. This likely washed away any traces of the criminal's DNA. Furthermore, forensic scientists in 2003 lacked access to the sophisticated tools available today. Tools that would allow them to carefully examine and collect minute particles of DNA. They were therefore compelled to focus on other evidence. They focused on the chain on the victim's leg and discovered the manufacturer's identification number. This allowed them to trace it to a chain of building supply stores operating on the East Coast. After checking the records, they found that the chain had been sold at one of those stores shortly before the crime. The investigators then located the manager who had made the sale. However, because the store was a supermarket frequented by hundreds of people daily, the seller couldn't recall every customer. Fortunately, the records allowed them to pinpoint the exact time and date of the purchase. Subsequently, the police were able to cross-reference this information with surveillance camera footage. All the cameras were functional in filming and recording. The chain store management cooperated fully, providing the necessary records. It was then easy to identify the two young men who had purchased the chain. The receipt also revealed that they had bought 2 cinder blocks, further solidifying the police's suspicions. Presumably, these weights had been used, along with the chain, to sink the body and hold it at the bottom. For some unknown reason, the pulleys broke, which aided in Kimberly's discovery before marine life could destroy the body. The police obtained images of the main suspects, but they were disappointed to find that the video, taken from a camera positioned under the ceiling, provided a poor angle. From this vantage point, the faces of the young men were not clearly visible, but it was apparent that they were between 20 and 25 years old. This clue prompted them to show the footage to the public and hold a press conference. A few days later, a man came to the police station, claiming to be one of the individuals recorded by the store camera. His name was Robert Brothers. However, he wasn't there to confess. He wanted to clear his name. He was visibly scared and explained that he had only accompanied his friend, Jacob Jones, who had asked him to help carry some heavy items at the hardware store. He confirmed that Jacob had purchased a chain and 2 cinder blocks without fully explaining their purpose. When Robert inquired, Jacob was evasive but eventually admitted that the blocks were for some impromptu weightlifting. Robert knew that Jacob was suspected of involvement in the murder of a 16-year-old girl and was deeply concerned. Robert requested that his name be kept confidential and provided a detailed account. He maintained that he had merely assisted in carrying heavy items from the hardware store and loading them into his friend's car, and he had no idea what happened to them afterward. This led detectives to their prime suspect, 20-year-old Jacob Jones. Investigators began to investigate how to connect Jacob to Kimberly's family. It turned out that he was Heather's boyfriend. Heather was about the same age as Kimberly, and they had been living together for the past 2 years. Those close to them described the girls as being very close. They became good friends and even shared clothes to resemble twins. Or so they thought. However, some claimed that the girls didn't get along and often argued. Suspicions and circumstantial evidence mounted. When Robert was approached again and asked why Jacob might have killed Kimberly, he suggested that Heather, who was jealous of Kimberly's beauty, could have been involved. Detectives spoke to Heather. She appeared as concerned about Kimberly's disappearance as her mother. However, like the rest of the family, she initially believed that her adopted sister had simply run away again and would soon return. Her concern only grew when her mother contacted law enforcement and reported Kimberly missing. As days passed without Kimberly's return, the situation became increasingly tense. Heather told detectives that after Kimberly's disappearance, she had sought comfort and support from her boyfriend, Jacob, but he had shown complete indifference. Heather perceived this as uncaring and insensitive, but nothing more. She didn't believe Jacob was capable of murder. Even during her initial interview with the detectives, Heather didn't raise any suspicion. She seemed sincere, cooperative, and provided all the information requested of her, claiming to have had nothing to do with her sister's death. Subsequently, Jacob was brought in for questioning. From the outset, he appeared nervous. He admitted to buying the chains and cinder blocks at the store but claimed that he had used them for other purposes. However, he refused to disclose where they were now. It was evident that he was concealing something. Just moments into the conversation, after they began questioning him more closely about Kimberly, Jacob requested a lawyer and refused to cooperate further. At the same time, Jacob confirmed that he knew about the crime because both Lorraine and Heather had spoken about it. With no specific evidence to present, law enforcement was forced to release him for the time being. Interviews with Jacob's colleagues and friends revealed that he had been acting unusually lately. He had become short-tempered, aggressive, and prone to lateness or even absenteeism, behaviors that were out of character for him. No one in Jacob's social circle could explain this sudden change. Just 2 weeks after Kimberly's body was recovered from the water, Heather and her boyfriend, Jacob, were having lunch at a cafe. Heather directly asked Jacob if he had been involved in her sister's murder. His reaction was peculiar. According to Heather, he responded that his lawyer had forbidden him from discussing it with anyone. Heather was shocked. She had expected a more open response, an angry denial of guilt, or something else that would demonstrate his innocence. At that point, Heather began to suspect that Jacob was acting suspiciously. Despite her growing doubts, she still found it hard to believe that her boyfriend could have committed such a brutal act as killing her sister. Detectives decided to investigate Jacob's background more thoroughly. At the time of the crime, Jacob was 20 years old and had recently graduated from high school. By most accounts, he seemed like a good person. He had even earned his pilot's license at 16 and always dreamed of flying. He seemed like a promising young man, and his qualifications were unusual for someone so young. He appeared responsible and had no history of violence. However, disturbing information soon surfaced. Several witnesses confirmed that Jacob and Kimberly did not get along. Kimberly often picked on him, even in Heather's presence, constantly calling him Four Eyes because he wore glasses. Some people knew she teased him because he wanted to become a fighter pilot, and she mocked his vision problems, insisting he would never succeed. They had even had arguments about it. The more the detectives investigated the relationship between the two, the clearer it became that Kimberly frequently teased and irritated Jacob. However, this still didn't seem like enough of a reason to kill her. But the coincidences were mounting and becoming too obvious to ignore. Detectives obtained a warrant for Jacob's arrest and immediately went to his house. As the police approached, they noticed suspicious activity. Jacob's parents were outside, his mother was hysterical, and paramedics were inside. Jacob had shot himself in the head with a shotgun minutes before the police arrived, dying instantly. The dead boy's father spoke to the detectives, revealing that Jacob had confessed to killing Kimberly Holton the day before. At the same time, Jacob claimed that another person, 23-year-old Michael Kaiser, whom he had met while working as a security guard at the racetrack, was also involved. Jacob referred to himself as an accomplice, shifting most of the blame onto Michael. Michael and Jacob weren't particularly close, but their paths often crossed at work. Michael was easily located and expressed shock that his friend had taken his own life. However, he denied being the mastermind behind Kimberly's murder, claiming he was only an accomplice. He insisted that Jacob had forced him to commit the brutal act, describing Jacob as a dangerous, cruel, and manipulative person who should be feared. Michael immediately invoked his right to a lawyer and initially refused to cooperate with the investigation. However, with a little pressure, he began to talk. According to Michael, the motive was Kimberly's constant embarrassment, mockery, and humiliation of Jacob, often in front of Heather. Jacob had simply grown tired of it. Michael claimed that Jacob even avoided going to Heather's house if Kimberly was there. However, the detectives suspected that this wasn't the whole truth. It seemed strange that a young man as driven as Jacob, who had earned his pilot's license at 16, excelled in school and at the University of Delaware, and worked as a freelance flight instructor at the Air Force Base, would simply throw his life away. Unfortunately, Jacob, the only one who could provide his side of the story, was dead. Detectives pressed Michael for a more truthful account. According to him, on the night of September 29 to 30, he and Jacob picked up Kimberly from the trailer park, where she lived with her foster family. Jacob instructed Michael to do this because he didn't want to be identified by any witnesses in the area. Michael was then supposed to take Kimberly to a secluded house so Jacob could discuss their differences with her. Initially, Michael believed that Jacob simply wanted to scare her and make her stop bullying. According to Michael's version of events, they then went to a store near a building supply center, where Jacob, Michael, and Kimberly bought alcohol and snacks. Afterward, the three went to a nearby motel. There, the discussion quickly escalated into intimate. Michael claimed that they had intimate with Kimberly, one after the other, with her mutual consent. Afterward, Kimberly went to the shower, and when she came out, Jacob suddenly attacked her, pinning her to the floor and choking her. She lost consciousness after receiving several blows. Michael claimed that Jacob kicked her. Michael said he tried to stop Jacob, but Jacob was stronger and pushed him aside. After Kimberly stopped showing signs of life, Jacob forced Michael to help him secure her ankles with duct tape and wrap her in a blanket. They then attached a chain and cinder blocks to her leg. They loaded the body into the trunk of Jacob's car and drove to the air base on the outskirts of town where Jacob worked. They then loaded the body onto a plane that Jacob used and took off Flying over the Atlantic Ocean, Jacob descended and slowed down. Michael helped throw the body overboard. Detectives believe that this action ruined their plans. As the body was dropped from too high an altitude, the strong impact of the water caused the cinder blocks to break and detach from the chain, and the body sustained a fracture at the base of the skull. The medical examiner determined that the injury was sustained posthumously from a fall from a great height. This version of Michael's confession also seemed unconvincing. It seemed strange that a conversation intended to clarify the relationship would suddenly lead to intimacy. It also seemed implausible that Jacob would spontaneously attack Kimberly when she came out of the shower. After all, there was no obvious reason for it at that moment. The supposed conflict had seemingly been resolved. Therefore, Michael's confession did not inspire confidence in the police. However, the second part of the confession, regarding the disposal of the body, it seemed more credible. It aligned with the fact that Kimberly's body remained undiscovered for a little over a week before being found near the coast. Michael's story about the body being dropped from the air was officially corroborated when the radar data tracking the flight from the airfield was reviewed. It confirmed that they had indeed left the airbase. That night, the plane flew close to the area where the body was later found, made a wide circle, and returned to the base early in the morning. After searching the dorm room where Jacob was staying, the police found a motel receipt dated September 30. The day Kimberly was killed, detectives spoke to Heather again and told her Michael's story. She also believed he was lying and had, in fact, orchestrated the whole thing. She had only ever heard bad things about Michael, describing him as violent and suspicious. Heather was sure that Kimberly hated Jacob, so there was no way she would have had consensual intimate with him or with Michael. Heather was certain that Michael's story was mostly a lie. At the very least, she believed that he had abused Kimberly and was now trying to justify his actions by claiming mutual consent and blaming Jacob, who could no longer refute his accusations. Only 2 days after Michael's arrest, during a routine morning check, a guard discovered that he had attempted to end his own life in his cell, using his shoelaces. Fortunately, he was found in time, with a pulse still beating. Michael was taken to the mid-sanction unit for treatment and then transferred to a ward for rehabilitation and recovery. His actions were regarded as a cowardly attempt to avoid justice, prompting psychiatric evaluations to assess his mental state. Michael was then placed under observation due to the high risk of repeated his own life attempts. In January 2004, the trial began, where Michael was tried for complicity in the murder of Kimberly Holton. The prosecution presented a considerable amount of evidence, though almost all of it was circumstantial. Michael then retracted his confession, and his lawyer attempted to explain it away as a result of insanity. His story about to end his own life attempt sounded particularly compelling. The prosecutor, however, emphasized that the confession contained many details that had never been published but were verifiably true. He argued that only someone involved in the crime could have known those details. Numerous witnesses testified, corroborating the chronology of events as described by Michael. While awaiting trial and afterward, Michael underwent several evaluations by specialists. Psychiatric experts deemed him extremely immature for his age and easily manipulated, which, they argued, explained his participation in the crime. Experts say that Michael, as a henchman, was simply an accomplice who could not resist Jacob's threats. Crucially, Jacob had a clear motive. Michael was repeatedly offered a plea deal for second-degree murder, which would have resulted in an 18-year prison sentence. However, he consistently refused, convinced that he would be acquitted of murder charges. Throughout this time, he maintained his innocence. Even his lawyer believed he should accept the prosecutor's offer, but Michael adamantly refused. On January 16, the jury began deliberations and ultimately found Michael Kaiser guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He was, however, fortunate in a way, as the state increased penalties for such charges a few years later, meaning he could have faced the death penalty. From the beginning of his imprisonment, Michael frequently incurred disciplinary infractions. He was caught with contraband on several occasions and was periodically placed in solitary confinement due to his problematic behavior. Currently, Michael remains in custody at the correctional center. His lawyer has made multiple attempts to challenge the court's decision, but all appeals have been rejected. Heather was never charged with any crimes related to the case. Despite some believing, she also had a motive to eliminate her annoying sister. Heather has since moved to Colorado, started a new life, and graduated from college. She, along with her mother, Lorraine, has spoken to reporters on several occasions. They grieved deeply for 16-year-old Kimberly. They believe that the two young men had brutally harmed Kimberly out of enjoyment or out of resentment, but they continue to blame only Michael for this. Her family tried to assist Kimberly, who was born to addicted parents associated with crime, but they were unable to do so. On a Sunday afternoon in Tijeras, New Mexico, loud explosions shattered the silence. After the noises stopped, they heard a dog yelp, and then silence. It was clear something awful was occurring inside a house. Later, a young man emerged from the house to speak with police, and his statements, along with what the police discovered, shocked the entire community. Join us as we explore this case further, revealing disturbing truth secrets, lies, and a courtroom drama where the distinction between innocence and guilt became more complicated than anyone imagined. The Mestre family wasn't well known in Tijeras, New Mexico, but those who knew them considered them quiet and reserved. The family, consisting of Raimundo Mestre, the father, Bertha Huerta Conde, the mother, their three children, Nancy, Adlai, and Brielle. They had moved to the small community around 2021. They rented a house with a large, private yard, and it quickly became one of their favorite things about the house. Raimundo was a hard-working man devoted to his family. Bertha, his wife, was a kind, caring homemaker, well-liked by their neighbors and friends. By 2024, their oldest daughter, Nancy, had moved in with her partner and was pregnant with her first child. As autumn neared, the entire family eagerly awaited the baby's arrival. However, their joy was short-lived. A sudden and tragic event was about to turn their happiness into grief. On Sunday, the 13th of October, just before 2:00 p.m., emergency services received a call from a concerned man. He explained that he had heard several loud bangs at Mestre house next door. They sounded like gunshots to him, 5 or 6 in all, followed by a single gunshot about 10 minutes later. He also thought he heard the distressed cries of a dog. At first, he thought he might be overreacting, but when he tried to reach their family by phone and got no answer, his anxiety grew. He walked to the house and rang the doorbell several times, but there was still no answer. That's when he decided it was time to call the police. Around 2:14 p.m., officers arrived and their body cameras began recording. As they approached the house, they had no idea what they were about to encounter. They knocked on the door. After a few moments of silence, a disoriented and unsteady young man, 24-year-old Adlai, answered. He chillingly stated his family had attacked him. When asked for more information, he said the attack occurred in his bedroom, and a knife was used. The officers told him to come closer. When they asked if he had any weapons, Adlai said yes, and then seemed to reach for something. The officers immediately told him to turn around so they could restrain and search him. Adlai complied. While still in handcuffs, he was asked to recount the events. This time, he stated that his father and sister had attempted to kill him. He claimed his father tried to stab him in the heart with a knife, while his sister held a meat tenderizer. He then confessed, without pausing, that he had killed them both. This was just the start of a story that would become increasingly disturbing and bizarre. Suddenly, Adlai's words quickly became meaningless and incomprehensible. His sentences were disconnected, dreamlike, and made no sense, leaving the officers unsure if he was confessing or simply rambling incoherently. After searching him, officers found a gun in his pants pocket. He gave it to them willingly. They then placed him in the patrol car. The police continued to search the house. At the door, they ordered anyone inside to raise their hands and come out. But no one did. That's when they noticed the first signs of what they were truly dealing with: dark reddish stains on the entryway floor. The patterns were unmistakable. Something violent had happened here. While waiting for backup, the officers began piecing together the grim picture forming before them. Once backup arrived, they entered the house. Inside, they found a disturbing scene. Blood droplets were splattered on the walls, and a trail of blood led upstairs, soaking into the carpet. This suggested that someone had been dragged up the stairs. They also found a severely injured dog, which explained some of the blood. After searching every room, they found no sign of the family. The search then moved to the backyard, where they quickly spotted more drag marks leading away from the house. But the yard was vast, stretching far beyond the officers' immediate line of sight. One officer returned to the patrol car, hoping Adlai could narrow down the search area. When police approached Adlai, the boy immediately begged not to be harmed. The officer calmed him, explaining they only needed to know the location of his family. Instead of answering, Adlai asked if the officer had seen his dog, sounding strangely excited. The officer repeated his question about Adlai's family. Adlai finally confessed that the bodies were in the backyard. He then directed the officer to where the bodies were. The search team received the information and quickly found the bodies of the Pardis, of Clordes, 46-year-old Raimundo, 51-year-old Bertha, and 17-year-old Brielle. Adlai's confession to ending their lives was, at least in this detail, the truth. After confirming the deaths, police took Adlai in for questioning. He claimed the bodies were convulsing and foaming at the mouth, and that their wounds had somehow healed. Then, Adlai launched into another nonsensical story, this time involving seismic waves, the Big Ben clock tower, a submarine, and an unknown woman. The detective let him talk for a few minutes before handing him a pen and a piece of paper and asking him to write down his story. Adlai readily agreed. It was at this point the detective understood this interrogation would be far from typical. After informing Adlai of his rights and making sure he understood them, the detective asked him again about the fate of his family. Ultimately, he confessed to shooting their dog. The animal was rushed for emergency veterinary care, suffering from 3 gunshot wounds. Despite the efforts to save it, the injuries were too severe, and the dog had to be euthanized. Back at the crime scene, investigators recovered a mop soaked with reddish stains. In the interrogation room, the detective continued to press for specifics, asking Adlai where his father had been during the attack and where he had delivered the fatal blows. At first, Adlai's words were nonsensical. Eventually, he stated that his father had been in the living room when he sustained the fatal injuries. Although officers had already located bullet casings inside the house, they also found other evidence: a meat tenderizing hammer stained with blood and a bladed weapon. This combination of clues led them to speculate on the sequence of the killings, but Adlai's statements only deepened the mystery. During the home search, officers found documents from September, just weeks before, showing that Adlai had recently been discharged from a mental health facility. He had been treated there for psychosis. The records mentioned he experienced hallucinations and heard voices. Officers photographed these documents as evidence. Later, when asked what he did with the bodies after killing them, Adlai answered with chilling calm, showing no sign of remorse. He said he had intended to bury them. Among Adlai's incoherent written notes, the detective found disturbing references to possession by dark forces and claims that his family had tried to curse him. It became clear there might be far more to his mental state than he was revealing. Left alone again, his behavior became stranger still. At one point, he appeared to hold a conversation with someone who wasn't there. Then, in an unsettling turn, he urinated into a plastic bottle. When the detective returned and realized Adlai's actions, he reprimanded him, telling him he could ask to go to the bathroom. Once more, the detective stepped out, instructing him to behave himself, but Adlai showed no signs of calming down. Instead, his erratic behavior escalated to a disturbing level. He began shouting to God, then suddenly turned to address the men in the room. Rising to his feet, he moved in a way that, captured on camera, would mark the moment the situation took a sharp, alarming turn. Without warning, Adlai began violently kicking the wall of the interrogation room. Within moments, he had created a hole large enough to squeeze through. Escaping into the hallway, he made a direct path toward the elevators. The noise drew the attention of deputies, who intercepted him just seconds later. It became clear that the walls of the sheriff's office were never designed to hold someone determined to break out. Deciding it was too risky to keep him inside, they placed him in the back of a patrol car to let him calm down. Once he appeared more settled, Adlai was brought back inside for processing photographs, a buccal DNA swab, and the collection of his clothing. He was issued a temporary jumpsuit and escorted back to the patrol vehicle. This time, the destination was the county jail. Upon arrival, he was placed in an intake holding cell. Investigators found Adlai's sister, Nancy, and had the difficult job of informing her that most of her family had been murdered in a shockingly violent way. She became visibly upset, sobbing, and struggled to understand what was happening. In a later interview with detectives, Nancy explained why Adlai might have brought up possession. She was both disbelieving and angry as she described how her family had minimized or excused Adlai's strange behavior. This was partly because their mother believed Adlai was possessed and not accountable for his actions. However, Nancy disagreed with this explanation, believing that there had been significant warning signs that were ignored. Nancy also told detectives that at the time Adlai was released from the hospital, mental health professionals concluded that he was not a danger to himself or others, and that he had never mentioned any intention of harming his family. When asked about his medication, Nancy confirmed he was prescribed treatment, but admitted he was not taking it consistently. She had confronted him about it herself, worried for his well-being. She said she wasn't the only one. Her mother had even found pills in the trash. Everyone in the household had urged him to take his medication. Despite these issues, Nancy said her brother had appeared normal for months leading up to the killings. Authorities later confirmed that the firearm believed to be the murder weapon was legally registered to their mother. On Monday, the 14th of October, the sheriff held a press conference calling the case highly complex and in need of thorough analysis. He disclosed Adlai's medical history and shared key investigative findings. The sheriff also raised concerns about the state's red flag gun laws, measures that allow authorities to temporarily remove firearms from individuals deemed a danger to themselves or others, suggesting that such intervention might have prevented the tragedy. The neighbor who had first called 911, it spoke to reporters as well, still shaken. He said he had never noticed anything alarming about the family and remembered them only as kind and friendly. On Friday, the 18th of October, 5 days after the murders, Adlai appeared in court for his initial hearing. One of the responding officers testified, describing the scene as brutal. Prosecutors told the judge they had recovered 10 9mm shell casings from the property, and that the victims also showed signs of blunt force trauma. The state played security footage from the sheriff's office, showing Adlai breaking through the wall during his attempted escape. Though calmer that day, the sight of the video prompted him to interrupt his own attorney, insisting he wanted to speak. Ignoring his lawyer's advice, he loudly claimed his medication had been stolen and that he had tried to escape because he was afraid. He repeated strange claims about his parents and sister, saying that they spewed strange liquids from their mouths, and urged the media to release forensic photographs to prove he was telling the truth and that he had acted only to save his own life. End of trial. Adlai Mestre was formally charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of evidence tampering, 1 count of extreme cruelty to animals, 1 count of escape from police custody, and 1 count of criminal damage to public property. His attorney argued for supervised release with proper medication, but the judge sided with prosecutors, ruling that Adlai was a danger to the community and ordering him held without bond. Months later, in April 2025, a judge declared Adlai incompetent to stand trial and ordered him transferred to a mental health facility for treatment. His competency will be evaluated again in the future. For now, no updates have been released, and it is presumed that he remains hospitalized, awaiting the court's final decision. Now that the full scope of this harrowing case is known, the question remains: will the justice system ultimately bring closure to the Mester family? Or will investigative challenges, mental health complexities, and systemic gaps in firearm regulation leave the truth forever clouded? Deborah and Taylor Meyer first met in southern Indiana through mutual friends and community ties. Both were young adults focused on their careers and futures. Deborah graduated from Jeffersonville High School in 2006 and was pursuing a career in nursing, driven by her natural desire to help others. She was attending 3 institutions: Indiana University Southeast, the University of Louisville, and Ivy Tech, to earn her Bachelor of Science in Nursing, reflecting her dedication and hard work. As their friendship grew, Deborah and Taylor discovered they shared similar values and aspirations, particularly their dreams of building a loving family. They often discussed marriage, children, and a life centered on love and respect. Deborah appreciated Taylor's commitment to being a loving partner and father, which mirrored her own vision of family life. Deborah was strong-willed and adventurous, and she enjoyed the outdoors, traveling, and exploring nature. Her dynamic spirit attracted Taylor, and to outsiders, they appeared to be a deeply loving couple, filled with hope for the future. Deborah and Taylor were excited about their future together as their friendship blossomed into love. In November 2021, they celebrated their wedding, marking the beginning of their journey as husband and wife. Their special day was a testament to their love and shared dreams of family life in Jeffersonville, Indiana. After their marriage, Deborah wholeheartedly embraced her personal and professional life. She had always wanted to be a mother and welcomed their first child in 2020. This indicates that Deborah might have become pregnant before the wedding, which is common for couples committed to starting a family. The birth of their first child brought them immense joy and strengthened their bond as they navigated the challenges of parenthood. Deborah gave birth to her second child in 2022 and her third in 2023, reflecting her desire for a large family. During this time, Deborah also excelled in her nursing career, dedicating herself to caring for others. She received the Daisy Award and was promoted to nurse manager at Wellstone Regional Hospital, recognizing her exceptional skills and compassion over her 15 years of service. Deborah's promotion to nurse manager marked an important milestone in her career, highlighting her leadership skills and clinical expertise. Both her colleagues and patients admired her exceptional abilities, which helped build her reputation as a dedicated and competent nurse. In addition, she successfully juggles the challenges of work while raising 3 young children, demonstrating her extraordinary strength and organizational skills. Above all, Deborah's commitment to her children was unwavering. She poured love, attention, and guidance into nurturing them, shaping their development with care. Friends and family observed how naturally she embraced motherhood, which clearly brought her great joy and fulfillment. She approached parenting with the same dedication she applied to her nursing career. However, after having children, some problems emerged in Deborah and Taylor's seemingly perfect life. The stress of raising 3 young children while both parents worked demanding jobs started to strain their relationship. What once felt like a solid partnership began to show signs of difficulty as they struggled to manage their various responsibilities. One major issue was Taylor's increasing suspicion and jealousy regarding Deborah's friendships and professional relationships. As she advanced in her career and took on more responsibility as a nurse manager, Deborah naturally built stronger working relationships with her colleagues. This development made Taylor uncomfortable, especially concerning her interactions with male colleagues at the hospital. Taylor's trust issues appeared to stem from deeper insecurities he struggled to express or address in a healthy way. He began to misinterpret innocent professional interactions as potential threats to their marriage, leading to a mindset filled with paranoia. Despite Deborah's attempts to reassure him of her commitment and clarify the professional nature of her relationships, matters grew more complicated when Taylor fixated on one specific coworker. He claimed that Deborah had saved this coworker's name in her phone as her best friend, Emily. Whether this was true or not became a catalyst for Taylor's escalating jealousy and suspicion. He convinced himself that this coworker posed a romantic threat to their marriage, disregarding Deborah's explanations of their innocent professional bond. As Taylor's jealousy grew, his behavior changed from being supportive and loving to becoming increasingly controlling and possessive. He began closely monitoring Deborah's movements and questioning her about where she had been and whom she had talked to. This created a tense atmosphere in their home, particularly difficult for Deborah, who valued trust and open communication. The stress of managing Taylor's jealousy while caring for 3 young children and maintaining her demanding career began to take a toll on Deborah. She found herself constantly needing to reassure him about her dedication to their marriage, while also striving to excel as both a mother and a nurse manager. The emotional weight of addressing his insecurities, alongside her other responsibilities, grew increasingly overwhelming. Around this time, Taylor's engagement with his role as a husband and father started to decline. He appeared disconnected from family life, often choosing solitary activities over participating in household duties or spending quality time with his children. This pattern of withdrawal added to Deborah's burden as she navigated her demanding career and managed the majority of domestic responsibilities. Deborah accused her husband, Taylor, of neglecting her and their 3 young children by constantly playing video games. This message, discovered after a tragic incident in Udomurat and IF, highlighted Deborah's dissatisfaction with Taylor's disengagement from family life and his apparent preference for gaming over his responsibilities as a husband and father. The gaming habit became a major source of tension in their home. While Deborah worked long hours at the hospital and took care of their children, Taylor often escaped into video games rather than participating in family life. This disconnection caused her additional stress, as she felt she was essentially raising their children alone while also managing her career. Feeling overwhelmed by Taylor's behavior, Deborah sought support from trusted friends and family. She shared with them how exhausted she was from juggling her job and the rising demands at home. In one message, she expressed her desperation by saying, "Raising 3 kids is exhausting." This message showed her realization that her marriage was not the partnership she had hoped for. She wanted Taylor to be honest about his commitment to their family so she could make informed decisions about their future. Her willingness to consider raising the children on her own revealed her strength and her deep concern for her children's well-being. Despite the growing distance between them and Taylor's concerning behavior, Deborah remained committed to making her marriage work. She was determined to stay by Taylor's side, believing their marriage was worth saving. In December 2023, more than a year before the tragic events that would follow, Deborah bravely confronted Taylor about her suspicions of his infidelity. This conversation exposed significant issues in their marriage and reflected Deborah's increasing worries about Taylor's commitment. The confrontation was emotionally intense, with Deborah expressing feelings of betrayal, while Taylor reacted defensively and dismissed her concerns. Deborah accused him of regularly communicating with another woman and meeting her just before their family took Christmas photos. This accusation indicated that Deborah had found evidence of Taylor's possible infidelity and was attempting to address the issue within their relationship. The timing of these alleged meetings, especially before family photos, would have been particularly painful for Deborah, as it marred cherished family moments. The discovery of potential infidelity further strained their already fragile marriage. Deborah faced the heartbreaking realization that the man with whom she had built a family might not be the committed partner she had thought. This news would have been devastating for someone who had invested so much of herself into their relationship and children. Despite these personal struggles, Deborah continued to thrive in her professional life. Even as her home life became increasingly challenging, her ability to maintain her high work standards illustrated her resilience and dedication. Her colleagues remembered her as a skilled and compassionate worker. Even during an incredibly difficult period in her life, Deborah and Taylor recognized that their marriage was in serious trouble. So they scheduled a marriage counseling session for the 17th of February, 2025. Deborah still believed that their relationship could be saved through professional help and honest communication. She was committed to improving their marriage and healing the damage to their trust and connection. This decision to seek counseling showed that both of them understood their relationship needed assistance. For Deborah, it was another effort to save the marriage she valued. She was ready to openly discuss their issues, hoping to find a way to move forward together. However, in the weeks leading up to counseling, Taylor's jealousy and suspicions intensified. In January 2025, he claimed to have seen a photo of Deborah holding hands with a male colleague at a casino in southern Indiana. Whether real or misinterpreted, this image became an obsession for Taylor, fueling his anger over what he believed was Deborah's betrayal. His fixation on this photograph consumed him, leading him to irrational thoughts that Deborah was having an affair and planning to leave him and their children. Instead of seeing this potential interaction as innocent, his jealousy skewed his perception, leading him to interpret any friendly gesture from Deborah towards her male colleagues as evidence of infidelity. Taylor's inability to trust Deborah or express his concerns healthily created a toxic atmosphere that risked leading to tragedy. As Valentine's Day 2025 approached, Taylor decided to make a significant effort to save their marriage. He planned an elaborate romantic evening to reignite their connection and express his love for Deborah. The theme "Bringing Paris to You" was meant to showcase his dedication and creativity. He bought Deborah a new dress and ordered dinner from a Japanese steakhouse he thought she would like. He even included their 3 young children in the event by having them draw Eiffel Tower pictures for decorations. This family involvement aimed to make the evening special and demonstrated Taylor's intention to create a memorable experience. He wrote a heartfelt card and danced to their wedding song with Deborah. These romantic gestures indicated Taylor's understanding of what would resonate with Deborah and reflected on their shared past. Dancing to their wedding song was particularly meaningful, as it symbolized his desire to rekindle their past happiness. Later, Taylor expressed that he had tried harder than ever to demonstrate his love and commitment to Deborah and their marriage. This statement highlighted his desperation to mend their relationship and his frustration with what he saw as Deborah's lack of appreciation for his efforts. He believed that a romantic evening could resolve deep-seated marital problems, but rebuilding trust and intimacy took a long-term effort. On February 14, 2025, Taylor celebrated Valentine's Day with high expectations. However, when Deborah's response was less enthusiastic than he had expected, he took it as a sign that she was not interested in the marriage. He grew increasingly agitated when she seemed distant during dinner, and his frustration mounted as the evening continued. Deborah's reaction may have reflected the stress of marital conflict, the exhaustion of working and raising 3 children, or simply the realization that romantic gestures alone were not enough to mend the rift in their relationship. Her response was influenced by months of tension, mistrust, and emotional distance that had plagued their marriage recently. The situation escalated quickly after a meal, when an argument broke out between Taylor and Deborah. Taylor accused Deborah of not appreciating his efforts and questioned her commitment to their relationship. The atmosphere became so tense that Deborah decided to leave temporarily to cool off. She got into her Ford Explorer and drove away, needing some time to process what had just happened. Meanwhile, Taylor's anger grew when she left, and he began to suspect that she was meeting a coworker. He thought she was having an affair with a. This suspicion was fueled by the timing of her departure, which coincided with what he assumed was the end of this man's work shift. About 20 minutes later, when Deborah returned home, Taylor was waiting, her suspicions and anger rising. As she went to the bathroom to freshen up, Taylor tried to read her text messages on her smartwatch, searching for proof of what he believed was her betrayal. His jealousy led him to become increasingly invasive and controlling. When Deborah noticed Taylor trying to access her messages, she confronted him about invading her privacy. In response, Taylor demanded to see her cell phone, insisting that she hand it over so he could search through her messages. When Deborah refused, the situation escalated into physical violence with serious consequences. The argument quickly turned into a physical struggle, as Taylor tried to forcibly take Deborah's phone from her. In this confrontation, Deborah defended herself by punching Taylor, but he overpowered her and took the phone. With her phone now in his possession, he started to choke Deborah as she pleaded with him to stop. She expressed her fear for her life and concern for their 3 young children who were asleep upstairs, asking him what he was going to do, whether he was going to kill her. As the violent confrontation continued, Deborah attempted to protect herself by hitting Taylor with a water bottle. But this only seemed to fuel his anger. In retaliation, Taylor grabbed a wine bottle and struck Deborah repeatedly in the head until she lost consciousness, leaving her motionless on the floor. Instead of stopping, Taylor's rage took a darker turn. He left her on the floor and went to the kitchen, where he retrieved a large kitchen knife. With the knife in hand, he returned to where Deborah lay helpless and began to repeatedly attack her in the chest and other areas of her body. The attack was brutal and lasted for an extended period of time. The scene was horrific, with blood splattered throughout the room. After the attack, he used Deborah's phone to take a picture of her lifeless body and sent it to a contact labeled her best friend Emily, with the message, "Your fault." The photograph was intended to traumatize the recipient and to place blame for Deborah's death on someone Taylor viewed as responsible for the destruction of his marriage. His actions revealed the depth of his delusion and his inability to accept responsibility for his own violent behavior. In Taylor's distorted thinking, Deborah's death was not the result of his choices, but rather the inevitable consequence of what he perceived as her betrayal. Following the murder, Taylor also sent messages to Deborah's friends and family members, informing them that he had killed her. These communications were sent through text messages and family group chats, creating a horrifying situation for those who received them. While Taylor was sending these messages and taking photographs, the 3 children remained asleep upstairs in their home, unaware that their mother had been murdered and their father had become a killer. One of Deborah's friends, who had received Taylor's disturbing messages, immediately recognized the severity of the situation and contacted the Jeffersonville Police Department. This friend also drove to Deborah's home to assist the officers, demonstrating quick thinking and bravery that potentially prevented an even greater tragedy. When the friend arrived at the house and began speaking with police officers who had responded to the scene, he received the horrifying photograph that Taylor had sent from Deborah's phone. This image confirmed the worst fears about what had happened inside the home and provided officers with crucial information about the situation they were about to encounter. Officers initially attempted to make contact with someone inside the house by knocking on the front door, but they received no response to their efforts. Given the information they had received about the domestic disturbance and the photograph showing what appeared to be a body, police made the decision to breach the front door in an attempt to reach any potential victims inside. As officers prepared to force entry into the home, the garage door suddenly opened and Taylor emerged from inside the house. His behavior toward the responding officers was immediately aggressive and non-compliant, forcing them to use control techniques to subdue him as quickly as possible. The confrontation required additional backup from Indiana State Police, who recognized the intensity of the situation and offered immediate assistance. Once Taylor was safely in custody, officers entered the house and discovered the horrific scene that awaited them inside. Deborah's body was found on the bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of the brutal attack that had taken her life. The amount of blood and the obvious violence of the crime scene painted a clear picture of what had occurred in the final moments of Deborah's life. Crime scene investigators arrived to begin their meticulous task of collecting every piece of evidence from her home. They meticulously examined every corner of the house, searching for clues that could provide insight into the events that had unfolded that night. The investigators documented the scene thoroughly, taking photographs and collecting samples that would be crucial for the prosecution's case. The evidence collected from the crime scene painted a clear picture of the brutal assault that had taken Deborah's life. The location of blood spatter, the position of her body, and the weapon used in the attack all provided crucial details about how the murder had been carried out. This physical evidence would later corroborate Taylor's own confession about the events of that night. At the police station, Taylor was questioned by investigators about his involvement in the murder of his wife. During these interviews, which were captured on body camera footage, Taylor provided detailed accounts of his actions and motivations on the night of Deborah's death. His willingness to confess and his matter-of-fact description of the violence revealed the extent of his psychological break from reality. After his confession and the conclusion of the initial investigation, Taylor was officially arrested and charged with murder. He was taken to the Clark County Detention Center, where he is being held without bail because of the seriousness of the charges. The court decided to deny bail based on the perceived threat he poses to the community. On the 18th of March, 2025, Taylor Meyer pleaded not guilty to the murder charge. His trial is set to start on the 15th of July, 2025, where he may face a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole for the violent murder of his wife. Around 3:00 a.m. on January 15, 2017, the 911 emergency service in Greene County, Ohio, received an alarming call from a bystander. The caller reported a wounded woman lying on the side of the road in Yellow Springs, approximately 25 kilometers from the city of Dayton. He shouted into the phone that he saw blood coming from her head. It looked like she had stopped breathing. Emergency services arrived at the crime scene, and at 3:30 a.m., she was later identified as 63-year-old Sherry Mendenhall. Sherry had been shot in the head, and there was a lot of blood around her. She was still wearing pajamas, indicating the attacker likely surprised her in bed. She tried to escape, but didn't succeed. The scene was disturbing and atypical for a prosperous residential area in this quiet town. She was found near a 2-story house, and the police decided to check the house for the criminal or any other victims. Approaching the house, the police officers noticed that the door was open, which seemed very suspicious and a potential sign of danger. They went inside and began calling out for the owners. Moving around the premises, they received no answer. It was eerily quiet inside. The police continued inspecting the house and discovered a man's body in the bedroom at the back of the first floor. He showed no signs of life. Later, arriving medical personnel confirmed his death. The deceased was identified as William Skip Brown, 44. He had been shot multiple times. Questioning neighbors, the law enforcement officers learned some details about the victims. Sherry and William had been best friends for many years and were neighbors, living in different apartments in the house. Their relationship was platonic, and they often helped each other. William's apartment was on the first floor and housed a small art gallery that he had organized. Sherry lived alone on the second floor. The patrolman called for reinforcements, and by the time the investigators arrived, it was already getting light. The forensic experts began by examining Sherry's body and immediately noticed one significant detail: her head was facing the road, away from the house. This suggested that she was trying to run away from her home when she was shot. Presumably, William had been killed first, and Sherry tried to escape, but the killers caught up with her, leaving her no chance. The killers had acted to remain undetected. William was found in the bedroom at the foot of his bed with multiple gunshot wounds. Investigators noticed a spent .22 caliber rifle cartridge in the hallway, outside the bedroom, and 3 9mm bullet casings on the bedroom floor. One of the casings from a 9mm pistol was found on the street near Sherry's body. Law enforcement officials sent these materials for examination, which later revealed male DNA on one of the casings. However, no matches were found in the police database, and the suspect could not be identified. The perpetrator likely had no criminal record, or his DNA sample had not been taken. Rifle bullets had hit the headboard, the mattress, the walls, and the closet just behind the foot of the bed. There were multiple blood spatters on the wall and door. William had 4 gunshot wounds to the chest, back, and torso. The coroner determined that 2 shots were from a .22 caliber rifle and 2 from a 9mm pistol. Police initially assumed that 2 criminals were involved, as 2 distinct types of weapons were used in the shooting. It seemed unlikely that a single person could fire both a rifle and a pistol simultaneously. The investigators' initial theory centered on robbery, given the presence of an art gallery within the house containing several valuable artworks. Furthermore, a series of recent house robberies had occurred in the area, and the perpetrators remained at large, potentially linking them to this case. However, a visual inspection of the crime scene revealed no signs of forced entry or struggle. The gallery on the first floor primarily showcased the work of the deceased's grandfather, Axel Bonson, a renowned photographer, alongside other pieces. Father Olma, familiar with the gallery's collection, confidently asserted that none of the exhibits had been stolen, including money, equipment, and jewelry. Even valuables in plain sight remained untouched. Consequently, the robbery theory was dismissed by William Brown's business associate. In addition to the gallery, which William pursued as a hobby, he operated a small roofing business, his primary source of income. He also enjoyed photography as a pastime. Investigators discovered that William had attempted to dial 911 twice, unsuccessfully. It appeared he heard or saw the intruders and tried to call for help, but was unable to complete the call. Fortunately for the police, William had installed an extensive video surveillance system for security purposes. Covering nearly all angles of the house, investigators seized the recordings and began processing the information, which proved to be invaluable. The outdoor surveillance cameras captured the moment of Sherry's murder at 3:00 am. The recordings show Sherry running out of the house and turning left down the street. Attempting to escape, she ran directly under a streetlight and then fell. Shot in the face, Sherry died on the spot. Shortly after, a tall, slender figure appeared in the frame, holding a weapon. The individual hastily exited the house, turned left toward the road, approached Sherry, and confirmed she was dead. This suggested the assailant possessed proficient marksmanship skills or, less likely, achieved a lucky shot. While the latter possibility couldn't be disregarded, the accuracy implied training. Although the criminal's face wasn't visible due to the low-quality, black and white night mode recordings, the surveillance footage clearly showed a tall, thin individual carrying a gun. The recording showed no evidence of a second suspect. Investigators were surprised by the boldness of the murder, which happened in a residential area in the middle of the night. The attacker's confidence shocked the police and neighbors. People reported hearing a gunshot, but no one saw the murder happen. Meanwhile, the autopsy results were finalized. The forensic report indicated that Sherry was killed by a single 9mm bullet fired from a distance of 20-25 meters, not from ground level, but from an elevated position of approximately 3-4 meters. This suggested the shot originated from either a second-floor window or a balcony or canopy. This was a significant clue, further reinforcing the idea that the shooter possessed considerable skill with firearms. Investigators found no evidence or leads in Sherry's apartment. Sherry, a retiree, had raised 4 sons who were now grown and lived independently. She had 8 grandchildren whom she often babysat. She had no professional competitors who might wish her harm. She kept no diary that might have provided clues, and her relatives maintained that she had no known enemies. Perhaps Sherry was an accidental victim. The police theorized that William was the intended target. The criminals came to his house specifically because of him, seeking to harm him, and shot him first. This suggested a targeted attack motivated by a personal vendetta. Detectives began investigating William's network of contacts to identify potential suspects. It quickly became apparent that William had, in fact, experienced conflicts with both former partners and several former employees. Detectives began scrutinizing these individuals, searching for someone with a compelling motive. The investigation began by focusing on current and former employees, as well as business partners, who might have held a grudge against William and sought revenge. It was discovered that a former partner had threatened William shortly before the murder, presenting a potentially strong motive for the crime. However, these leads ultimately proved fruitless. This individual had an ironclad alibi for the time of the crime. He was visiting his grandmother in Arizona and physically could not have been present to commit the shooting. He also denied any involvement and successfully passed a polygraph test, leading to his exclusion from the suspect list. Detectives continued to examine the list of potential enemies. One name, in particular, drew their attention: a disgruntled former employee, who was also the nephew of William, a 25-year-old named Dustin Merrick. William had considered Dustin his right-hand man and trusted him implicitly. Then, something happened between them, and Dustin was eventually fired. What surprised everyone was that no one knew exactly why he was fired. The prevailing understanding was that something serious had occurred. As William wouldn't have dismissed a relative, he was so eager to help over something trivial. Presumably, the issue was Dustin's irresponsible and negligent attitude towards work, which caused problems. Several colleagues of the deceased stated that Dustin harbored a strong grudge against William due to the quarrel and his subsequent dismissal. Dustin believed his uncle owed him $400, which William refused to pay. Dustin was not just offended, but very angry with William, and some even believed that the guy could well have decided to commit murder because of money. Dustin Merrick was invited to the police station for questioning. During the interview on January 20, 2017, Dustin confirmed that he was angry with his uncle because of the conflict. Dustin said that William had fired him because he refused to work overtime and that he considered this a flimsy excuse to get rid of William. While Dustin admitted to being offended by his uncle, he claimed he wouldn't kill a relative over something so insignificant. In reality, the roofing construction business demands a lot of hard, fast work. Therefore, high performance is expected. Roofers are often asked to stay after work. William wanted his team to be composed of exactly such people who are passionate about the business and work to the fullest, and he was ready to pay good money. The faster the job was completed, the more money he received. William made a mistake by hiring him. Dustin was lazy, uninterested in his work, and performed poorly. His projects were always late, causing William problems and penalties. Therefore, William decided to fire Dustin for his negligence. According to Dustin, on the day of the crime, he was with his younger brother, Brett Merrick, staying with him overnight. They drank and then slept until the morning. Dustin asserted that his brother could confirm his alibi, which Brett, in fact, did. However, investigators were in no hurry to rule out Dustin as a suspect. Law enforcement officers asked Dustin to provide a DNA sample to compare with DNA from the crime scene and, if there was a discrepancy, eliminate him as a suspect. Dustin agreed, stating that he wanted to clear his name, and provided a DNA sample. It then came to light that Dustin was a member of the National Shooting Association, a first-class shooter, and owned several types of weapons, including a .22 caliber rifle and a 9mm pistol. Given that the murder was committed with these types of weapons, further suspicions arose. The investigators requested Dustin's weapons for ballistic examination, and he granted them permission. The police were impatiently awaiting the results of the DNA and weapon examinations. During a police inspection of the 9mm handgun designed to hold 13 bullets, they found only 9 bullets inside. Notably, 4 cartridges were missing, a detail that aligned with the shell casings recovered from the crime scene. Soon, the examination results arrived. Astonishing everyone, ballistics confirmed a match between the murder weapon and the handgun found at Dustin's house, which was registered in his name. Furthermore, Dustin's DNA matched the DNA found on the cartridge casings recovered from the crime scene. All evidence pointed to Dustin. However, after reviewing the surveillance camera footage again, the detectives noticed another man. This man had a different build and height. The police immediately suspected Dustin's brother, Brett. According to Dustin, he and Brett often spent their days together drawing Solomons. Brett had even provided Dustin with an alibi. However, Brett seemed to be the most likely accomplice and closely resembled the figure captured on CCTV on January 24, 2017. Based on this significant evidence, Dustin was arrested, and Brett was brought in for questioning. At that time, Brett was unaware of Dustin's arrest and continued to corroborate his brother's alibi. Brett denied any involvement in the crime, and the police had little concrete evidence against him beyond the unclear surveillance recordings, which were insufficient to establish guilt. Out of desperation, the detectives decided to use a ruse. They told Brett a partial truth that Dustin had been arrested and that there was circumstantial evidence against Brett. They also falsely claimed that Dustin had implicated him in the crime. This tactic worked. Initially, Brett seemed skeptical, but the detectives were convincing, using all available information to pressure him. Brett became noticeably nervous, and his story became inconsistent. Finally, Brett cracked and confessed. According to Brett, he had gone to Dustin's house that day to draw fur, a shared hobby. However, Dustin was already drunk. They drew, chatted, and continued to drink. Dustin continued to express his anger toward William, feeling that he had been underpaid. Suddenly, Dustin jumped up and headed for the door. Brett heard Dustin open the door and went outside. He saw Dustin getting into his car, apparently intending to confront William. Dustin was very agitated. Brett hurried to the car and got in with him, hoping to control his brother's actions and prevent him from doing something foolish. They drove to William's house, parking discreetly near an old barn to conceal their car. Dustin took out a gun, a rifle, from the back. Brett jumped out of the car and began to question his brother. "What's going on? Why do you need a gun?" Dustin handed him another gun. Dustin knew the locations of the security cameras around the house and avoided them. Brett followed him, carrying the second gun. The brothers climbed onto the roof of a porch to avoid the cameras and quietly made their way into William's house. Brett stood in the kitchen, behind a wall. To protect his brother, he watched as William approached the bedroom. Then he heard gunshots. Brett then saw Sherry run out from the second floor, screaming and fleeing the house, startled by the gunshots. According to Brett, they had not anticipated such a turn of events and were completely taken aback. Then he fired a shot toward the door to scare Sherry, who was running down the stairs. Brett did not intend to harm her, just wanted to scare her. Then, Dustin left the bedroom and chased after Sherry to eliminate her as an unwanted witness. He climbed out onto a canopy and shot at her. She fell dead. This confirmed the detectives' initial belief that Sherry was an accidental victim of this crime, suffering only because she lived next to the first victim. When they were fleeing, Brett unknowingly was caught on a surveillance camera. Dustin, who worked for William and often visited the house, knew the camera locations and managed to evade them, which is why he was not filmed. Brett maintained that he was not involved in the murders. His only guilt was getting into the car with his brother and failing to stop Dustin from committing the crime. Following his confession, Brett Merrick, 24, was arrested. Just like his brother, Brett's story left the detectives with several unanswered questions. If Brett was supposedly watching Dustin to stop him from acting recklessly, why didn't Brett confiscate Dustin's gun? Furthermore, why would Brett accompany Dustin inside the house and fire gunshots to frighten Sherry? This behavior seemed illogical and suspicious, leading police to suspect Brett might have also shot William. While it seemed improbable that Dustin fired both a rifle and a pistol simultaneously, the police lacked definitive proof, and both brothers denied it. Dustin Merrick was charged with aggravated murder. Brett Merrick was charged with complicity in 2 counts of aggravated murder and assault. Both Dustin and Brett faced the death penalty, the legal penalty in Ohio, and the prosecution immediately offered them a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. Initially, Dustin and Brett refused the deal. However, they soon changed their minds. In September 2018, Dustin and Brett in order to avoid capital punishment, entered into a plea bargain with the prosecution to reduce their sentence, thus giving up their right to appeal the verdict. They also refused to testify at the trial and tell the details of the attack. The prosecution and the victims' relatives also approved this deal in order to avoid a painful and lengthy trial. Dustin Merrick pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the right to parole, plus 11 years for the home invasion, and 3 years for the other charges. He will spend the rest of his life in prison without parole. Brett Merrick regretted that he participated in this crime and sincerely repented. The victims forgave him. Brett pleaded guilty to complicity and was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the right to parole. His release date is scheduled for 2042, by which time he will be 49 years old. The murders of Sherry Mendenhall and William Skip Brown have rocked Yellow Springs, a quiet town known for its friendliness and safety. The deaths of 2 close friends, committed by William's nephew in a personal dispute, are not only a personal loss, but also a reminder of the consequences of unresolved resentment. Surveillance cameras and DNA evidence helped bring Dustin and Brett Merrick to justice, but they cannot erase the pain of the family and community. The case highlights the importance of resolving conflicts peacefully and the need for support systems to prevent similar tragedies. Yellow Springs, though traumatized, continues to work to restore trust and unity among its residents. That night, Keith Green went out to attend an important meeting, not knowing it would be the last time he would be seen. The next morning, his phone was found abandoned in Golden Gate Park. No trace, no message. As police followed each lead, they all pointed to a cold, premeditated murder. But when the trial ended, the nation was shocked. The accused walked free. It was a story that made everyone ask, is justice ever fair? Or is it only for the rich? At approximately 9:00 p.m. on April 28, 2016, Keith Green and Tiffany Lee met at Millbrae Pancake House, a small restaurant about a 30-minute drive from their former home in Hillsborough. They planned to discuss the custody of their 2 daughters. However, the conversation shifted, and Keith requested $4,000 per month in alimony from Tiffany, along with one of their BMW cars. He claimed these requests were to ensure their daughter's comfort when staying with him, preventing them from experiencing a significant decrease in their standard of living. The discussion lasted approximately 1 hour. Tiffany left the restaurant before Keith. The following morning, the 29th of April, around 10:00 a.m., a passerby discovered an unattended cell phone in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. The phone was identified as belonging to Keith Green. This discovery was puzzling because the park was a considerable distance from Hillsborough, and Keith had no apparent reason to be there. Friends and family attempted to contact Keith by phone, but he did not answer. Tiffany also stated that she had not heard from him since they left the restaurant. By that evening, missing person flyers featuring Keith's picture were being distributed throughout the city. At the time of his disappearance, Keith was wearing black sweatpants and a white jacket with green sleeves. He had tattoos of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X on his legs. The search moved quickly. The case took on greater urgency when it became clear that Keith hadn't returned to the friend's home where he'd been staying temporarily, nor to any relatives. None of his bank accounts had been touched, and his phone was switched off. From the moment he walked out of the diner, it was as if Keith had simply vanished. Keith Andrew Green was born on July 19, 1989, and raised in San Mateo, California. He was from a working-class family. After his parents' divorce, he lived with his mother, Colleen Cudd, although they didn't have much money. Keith was energetic and sociable. In high school, he was a talented athlete, particularly in football. As the star quarterback at Aragon High School, he led his team to an undefeated season and a playoff win in 2005. His athletic skills earned him a partial scholarship to Eastern Washington University, where he continued to play football. However, he had difficulty keeping up with his coursework and the rigorous training demands of college sports. Ultimately, he withdrew from the university before graduating. After returning to California, Keith had some run-ins with the law. As a minor, he got involved in a scheme involving the fraudulent use of Macy's gift cards. While he didn't face severe legal penalties, the incident hurt his reputation and future prospects. In early 2009, Keith met Tiffany, a young woman from a rich Chinese family in Hillsborough, California. Although they had different backgrounds and lifestyles, they started dating. Within a year, they moved into a lavish house in a very exclusive neighborhood, worth about $7 million. Tiffany's mother had given her the house as a gift. This was a huge change for Keith, who went from living simply to enjoying luxury every day: expensive cars, household help, a nanny, and a personal driver. Keith and Tiffany have 2 daughters. From the outside, they seem like the ideal family. However, Keith wasn't steadily employed and depended on Tiffany's family for money. He said he wanted to focus on self-improvement. With Tiffany's support, he enrolled at Le Cordon Bleu in Pasadena, a well-known and costly culinary school. He was scheduled to finish his studies in September 2016 and intended to start a restaurant career. Tiffany paid for his tuition, which was approximately $40,000 per year. Despite their apparent success, problems were developing. Keith felt insecure because he relied on the Lee family for money, and this caused friction. People close to Tiffany said she started seeing Keith less as a father to her children and more as someone just spending her money. In early 2015, Keith and Tiffany's relationship began to fall apart. Keith was drinking and using marijuana. He still couldn't find a steady job. His culinary school training didn't make up for his financial and emotional reliance on Tiffany. They argued more and more often. They officially separated in October 2015. Keith moved in with a friend, but wanted to stay involved in his daughters' lives. He also tried to maintain their previous lifestyle, possibly for both their benefit and his own. However, Tiffany controlled most of the money and decisions, which made Keith feel increasingly disconnected and saddened. To better understand the story, let's learn about Tiffany's life. She was born in Beijing, China. Tiffany grew up in a wealthy family whose primary business was real estate. They owned residential and commercial properties in major Chinese cities, including a skyscraper in Beijing. Over time, the family expanded their investments to the US, the Caribbean, and other international markets. Besides real estate, they also invested in logistics, high-tech companies, and global trade. Their interests included shipping and electronic supply chains. This diverse investment strategy helped them to steadily increase their wealth. Tiffany's early years were split between 2 countries. She spent much of her childhood in China, attending elite private schools that emphasized strict discipline, high academic expectations, and a strong sense of hierarchy. She studied piano, practiced ballet, and participated in competitions. Concurrently, her parents introduced her to business matters from an early age, gradually involving her in family investment discussions. In 1992, Tiffany's family settled permanently in California's Silicon Valley. Then, she became a U.S. citizen in 2000. She graduated from a private high school and later earned a master's degree in business from the University of San Francisco. Despite fully integrating into American life, her family maintained close cultural and financial ties to China. In the early 2010s, Tiffany managed her family's real estate in California. She was responsible for several properties, including their Hillsborough mansion, which they had bought before moving to the city. Hillsborough View was chosen for its safety, reputation, privacy, and wealthy residents who didn't need to show off. Tiffany's social background, education, and perfect English allowed her to easily fit in with the local upper class. She went to charity events, joined parent groups at private schools, networked with business owners and lawyers. People saw her as a confident and independent woman from a prominent family. Her behavior reflected her dual background. She was reserved, strategic, but also friendly in public, and very disciplined in business. Tiffany was an only child, so she felt immense pressure from her parents. They expected her to inherit the family business, expand it internationally, and secure its future. Tiffany shaped her life around these expectations. She stayed out of trouble, avoided attention, and showed no desire to break free from her family's wealth. Instead, she worked hard to be seen as someone dedicated to protecting and increasing their fortune. Having a dual cultural identity was both beneficial and challenging for her. She was able to leverage the advantages of both Chinese discipline and American adaptability. However, the strong expectations of her family sometimes conflicted with her own desires. This created tension in her romantic relationships, particularly when her partners didn't meet her family's approval. Tiffany started a relationship with Kaveh Bayat. Tiffany said this happened after she and Keith had broken up for good. However, others said she was seeing Kaveh Bayat while she was still with Keith. When Keith learned about Kaveh Bayat, it made his conflict with Tiffany much worse. Kaveh Bayat then moved into the house where Keith used to live with his daughters, which Keith felt was a deliberate provocation. Their relationship became even more hostile, with Tiffany and Keith constantly arguing and accusing each other of manipulating the situation. There were also rumors that Keith threatened to reveal damaging information about Tiffany, possibly about her new relationship or business dealings, unless his demands were met. These threats made it impossible for Tiffany and Keith to cooperate in any way. Keith was in a difficult position. He lacked a stable job and home, and struggled to see his daughters regularly. Many people doubted his sincerity. He openly expressed his frustration and desperation, but he remained determined to be part of his daughters' lives. Even as his situation worsened, he stayed in California to be near his children, refusing to move in with family elsewhere. By the end of April 2016, despite appearing to communicate, Keith and Tiffany no longer trusted each other. They saw each other as opponents with conflicting goals. From the very start of the investigation into Keith Green's disappearance, Tiffany Lee was considered a possible person of interest. However, concrete leads only emerged after the interrogation of Olivier Adela, a close associate of Tiffany, and her new partner, Kaveh Bayat. Olivier, a former MMA fighter and owner of a transportation company, had initially been hired as a personal trainer and later as a bodyguard. He would become a key figure in revealing the events leading to the crime. During questioning, Olivier confessed in detail to the crime. He admitted he wasn't there when it happened, but knew who did it and how. He said that on the 28th of April, 2016, he followed Tiffany and Keith after they left the Millbury restaurant. Tiffany was driving, with Keith as a passenger. GPS data confirms Olivier's statement that he followed them that night, contrary to Tiffany's original story, that she dropped Keith off somewhere along the way. Olivier stated that she took Keith all the way to her house in Hillsborough. Investigators believe the crime occurred at Tiffany's home. Olivier claims he was driving behind them but didn't participate in the crime, though he knew it was going to happen. Kaveh Bayat claims he shot Keith in the head with a 9mm handgun in the garage of their home. Blood evidence in the garage and one of the family's cars confirmed Keith was there. After the shooting, the body was put in a vehicle. The following day, Tiffany and Kaveh asked Olivier to get rid of the body. Olivier agreed because he felt he was already too involved and saw it as repayment for the money, gifts, and loyalty they had given him. He drove the body to a secluded, wooded area in Sonoma County. 2 weeks later, the body was found. Forensic experts determined Keith died somewhere else. The most important part of Olivier's statement was his claim that the crime was planned months beforehand. He stated that Tiffany and Kaveh had asked him to kill Keith as early as February 2016. When Olivier came to see them, they took his phone and searched him to make sure he wasn't recording them. As a precaution, Olivier said he refused to kill Keith himself but agreed to pressure him, saying he didn't want to go too far. However, he continued to communicate with Tiffany and Kaveh, assist them in other ways. Later, when they asked him to get rid of the body, he agreed because he felt he couldn't refuse. Investigators confirmed his involvement. Blood matching Keith's DNA was found in the trunk of Olivier's car. Surveillance footage also showed all three moving in sequence, first toward Tiffany's home, then to the remote location where the body was later found. The evidence of premeditation became the backbone of the prosecution's case. The search uncovered messages between Tiffany and Cave indicating they had been working together. The murder weapon itself was never recovered. However, the wound characteristics and trajectory led experts to conclude that a 9mm handgun had been used. Additional, though not conclusive, evidence came from gunpowder residue found in the garage where, according to Olivier, the shot was fired. Olivier's confession formed the basis for arresting all three suspects. His detailed knowledge of the transport of the body and facts only a participant could know proved his active role rather than mere presence at the scene. Olivier's testimony was obtained as part of a preliminary agreement with the district attorney's office. He agreed to cooperate in hopes of reducing his own sentence, an arrangement that would later play a pivotal role in the case. Early in the investigation, authorities believed they had enough proof to determine that Keith Green's death was not accidental or the result of a spontaneous fight. The investigators determined the crime was planned in advance, with each of the three suspects assigned a specific role. Tiffany was initially questioned on May 4th. When asked about the GPS data showing her traveling the same route as Keith on the night of his death, she denied knowing why and maintained that they had separated after dinner. However, investigators already had a different understanding of what happened, and her responses only increased their suspicion that she was hiding something. Around the same time, Cave was also questioned. He denied any involvement, claiming that he was at home on the night Keith went missing. However, his cell phone data placed him in the same area where Tiffany and Keith's movements were recorded, and later near Olivier's residence. He had also been exchanging messages with Tiffany throughout the evening of the 28th of April. This contradicted his version of events and heightened investigators' doubts. On May 26, 2016, Tiffany Lee, Cave Bayat, and Olivier Adela were all arrested. They were charged based on false statements, inconsistencies in their stories, cell phone data, biological evidence, surveillance video, and suspicious messages. However, key pieces of evidence were still missing, such as the murder weapon, a recording of the crime, or a confession from the actual shooter. Despite being charged together, each suspect's legal case progressed separately. Tiffany was the first person granted bail in the case. Prosecutors worried she might leave the country and requested a very high bail amount. Because Tiffany had dual citizenship in the US and China, substantial financial assets, and property in other countries, the court set her bail at an unusually high $35 million. This was one of the largest bail amounts ever in San Mateo County. California law allows a defendant to be released by paying 10% of the bail in cash, with property covering the rest. Within 2 weeks, Lee's family raised the money by using California real estate as collateral and paying some of the amount in cash. Tiffany was released on June 8, 2016, and was monitored electronically and not allowed to leave the country. The public responded quickly and strongly. Newspapers and social media buzzed with discussions about whether the situation was fair. A wealthy woman, accused of planning a crime in advance, was allowed to go home. Meanwhile, the other two defendants stayed in jail. Activists, the victim's family, and people fighting for equal rights claimed this case showed how much better options rich people have compared to everyone else. Articles started to ask if the justice system could ever be truly fair, if being rich could buy your freedom. As the trial approached, the prosecution faced a significant hurdle. They had no direct physical proof linking Tiffany to the crime. Instead, their case relied on circumstantial evidence, including messages, witness statements, traces of blood, but no murder weapon, crime scene video, or Tiffany's fingerprints at the location. Their main task was to present this indirect evidence in a compelling way. The defense attorneys presented a different argument. Tiffany's lawyers claimed the case was based on guesses, not proven facts. They highlighted that Tiffany's DNA wasn't found in the garage where the crime supposedly happened, and there were no fingerprints or a murder weapon linking her to it. They stated that there was no clear evidence connecting her to the crime. They also expressed worry about prejudice, implying that people suspected her because of her ethnicity and wealth. Cave's defense relied on similar arguments: insufficient evidence, no direct link between him and Keith's body, and no trace of his biological material at the suspected crime scene. His lawyers emphasized that simply exchanging text messages with Tiffany could not be equated with carrying out the crime. For Olivier, the strategy was different. His decision to cooperate as a witness strengthened the prosecution's case, but also created a vulnerability. His testimony could be seen as the result of pressure or an attempt to avoid prison time. From the very beginning, even during the initial hearings, it was obvious that the trial would be a major event. The case involves sensitive topics like violent death, family arguments, money, immigration, legal strategies, and unfair social differences, which were sure to attract a lot of public interest. Both the prosecution and defense used all available legal, financial, and media resources to try to win. Under the court's guidance, Tiffany stayed out of the public eye and only communicated through her lawyer's official announcements. Cave and Olivier remained in jail awaiting trial. Although their cases were initially separate, they were combined into one trial. This allowed the prosecutors to present a single, coherent explanation of the crime. The main trial in the Keith Green case began that September in San Mateo County Superior Court. Tiffany and Cave were the defendants, with Olivier's testimony forming the backbone of the prosecution's organized conspiracy theory. According to prosecutors, the motive was Tiffany's desire to eliminate a former partner she saw as a threat to her reputation and financial stability. Olivier's testimony was the most important part of the trial. Under oath, he confirmed Cave and Tiffany's involvement in the alleged plot. However, during cross-examination, the defense exposed inconsistencies. For example, he couldn't clearly explain why, after Keith's death, he first drove home and only later returned for the body. The absence of definitive proof placing him face-to-face with Tiffany and Cave at the moment of the crime was another weakness. Questions also arose regarding Olivier's finances. A search of his home uncovered $30,000 in cash and expensive items, including a watch that had belonged to Keith. Olivier claimed the money came from his work and personal savings, but this explanation was met with skepticism. The defense argued that he could have been more than an accomplice, possibly even the direct perpetrator, acting alone. The prosecution maintained that the evidence formed a clear chain motive: planning, execution, concealment, and coordinated actions by the participants. The defense countered that not a single piece of physical evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA, no weapon, directly proved Tiffany had committed the crime or was present when it happened. Meanwhile, the court also considered the case of Cave Bayat. His defense categorically denied any involvement in the crime. He maintained his innocence, claiming he had been at home at the time of the case. His attorneys argued that the prosecution had not presented a single piece of physical evidence placing him at the scene. After weeks of testimony, the trial reached its decisive stage. The jury now had to decide whether the evidence presented was strong enough to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. After Olivier Adela testified, the murder charges against him were dismissed, and he was freed. However, his freedom didn't last long. As soon as he left the courthouse, federal immigration officers arrested him for violating U.S. immigration laws. A background check revealed that there was no record of American citizenship for someone named Olivier Adela. It turned out his real name was Mustafa Traore, and he had been living in the United States illegally for 20 years using forged documents and a stolen identity. He had fraudulently obtained U.S. citizenship, and much of his life story, including his claimed service in the French Foreign Legion, was false. After his arrest, Mustafa was transferred to a federal detention facility and charged with document fraud and identity theft. Unlike the Keith Green case, this trial attracted little public attention. During the hearings, Mustafa confessed that he had been using a fake name since the early 2000s. He explained to the court that he was forced to leave his country of origin because of traumatic experiences he had as a child. He said that when he was 9 years old, he was stabbed in the face while trying to protect his mother from an abusive attack by soldiers. His family escaped twice, first from Liberia, and then from the Ivory Coast. Mustafa said he changed his name and nationality to begin a new life, escape threats, and build a more secure future for his family. He insisted that he had never used the false identity to commit acts of violence and that his employment in the U.S. had always been legal. The court proceedings focused solely on immigration violations, not on the circumstances of Keith Green's death. Mustafa was found guilty of using forged documents and sentenced to 6 months in prison. The judge took into account his confession, cooperation with law enforcement, lack of a violent criminal record, and his personal history. The judge added that he hoped never to see Mustafa in court again and urged him not to revert to his old ways. This turn of events cast doubt on the reliability of Mustafa's testimony in the Green case, the concealment of his true identity, un invérifiable past, and his role as a witness with clear personal stakes, all weakened the prosecution's position. None of the people connected to the events of 2016 ever gave a direct confession to committing the crime. On November 4, 2019, in San Mateo County, a jury found Tiffany Lee and Kaveh Bayat not guilty in the death of Keith Green. Despite a 3-year investigation, a widely publicized trial, and extensive testimony, prosecutors were unable to prove their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The verdict shocked Green's family and led to significant media coverage and debate. Many journalists and people believe the verdict showed a serious problem with the justice system. The evidence: blood in a car, secret text messages, matching location data, and testimony from Mustafa made the acquittal seem illogical. However, the defense successfully weakened the prosecution's case by highlighting the lack of clear proof, the questionable nature of the evidence, and the untrustworthiness of a main witness who had lied about who he was. After Kaveh Bayat's acquittal, the district attorney decided not to retry him. Considering the previous verdict and the unlikelihood of a different outcome, they closed the case. While the legal case ended, Keith Green's family struggle continued. Colleen, the mother of Keith, sued Tiffany for emotional distress and financial losses resulting from her son's death. The lawsuit also concerned the future Keith's daughters. The court ruled that Tiffany Lee must pay more than $100,000 in damages. Custody of Keith's daughters was awarded to Tiffany's relatives. Once the case was resolved and her travel restrictions lifted, Tiffany left the United States. Media reports indicated she relocated to China. Her exact location and activities remain unknown, but sources claim she was living in a jurisdiction with no extradition treaty. She has never given an interview and has not publicly revisited the case. The Keith Green case made many people think the American justice system is unfair. News stories compared Green's case to other cases where rich people seem to get away with crimes, like assault or financial fraud. However, unlike other cases, there was no clear evidence to convict Tiffany. For Keith's family, neither public outrage nor a civil judgment could replace the one thing they wanted most: a sense of justice. Keith Green was laid to rest without a definitive answer to the question of who pulled the trigger. And his daughters, who lost their father, were left with memories clouded by unanswered questions. It was a warm Saturday night in Southern California. Gloria Zamora had just finished dinner with someone she trusted. A night that should have ended with nothing more than a smile and plans, but as she stepped out of the restaurant and toward the parking lot, everything changed in less than 60 seconds. A figure emerged from the shadows. No warning, no chance to escape. Just the deafening crack of gunfire cutting through the night, then silence. In that single, brutal moment, 3 lives were shattered forever. And when authorities revealed who the gunman was, shockwaves ripped through the community. This is not just an ordinary crime, but a story of ambition, obsession, and a woman who refuses to bow to fate. Gloria Zamora was born around 1985 in Fresno, California, the 3rd child of Mexican immigrants seeking a better life. Her mother came from Jalpa, Zacatecas, while her father was originally from Culiacan. When Gloria was just 2 or 3 years old, her parents separated. The home environment had been turbulent. Her father battled alcoholism, and the abuse left deep emotional scars. Though Gloria held only faint memories of him, she understood that her mother had once come dangerously close to losing her life. After the separation, Gloria, her mother, and 3 older siblings moved to East Los Angeles to live with her grandmother. It was a strict household, marked by rigid rules and little tenderness. Her mother and older brother launched a small food business to make ends meet, but daily life remained difficult. Gloria often described her childhood as anything but easy. She only reached the 8th grade before her life took a dramatic turn. At just 16, Gloria became pregnant with her first daughter. The baby's father was even younger than she was and quickly disappeared. Suddenly, she found herself a teenage mother, raising a child on her own. With the support of her family, Gloria relocated to San Bernardino County, where she began to rebuild her life. After giving birth, she worked multiple jobs, sometimes 2 or 3 at once. While attending night classes in a determined effort to finish high school, her only goal was to create a better future for her daughter. As the years went on, her bond with her siblings grew strained. While Gloria stayed focused and responsible, they fell into substance abuse, creating distance and tension within the family. By the age of 20, Gloria married for the first time and had 2 more children. For a time, life felt stable, but cracks soon appeared. Infidelity destroyed the trust in her marriage. Afraid of raising 3 children alone, Gloria hesitated to leave. Then, life delivered another test. At 24, during a routine doctor's visit, she was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. The news was devastating. Balancing treatment, motherhood, and a crumbling marriage pushed Gloria to her limit. But it also gave her clarity. She made one of the hardest decisions of her life, to divorce and move forward on her own. Not long after, she met Thomas Alberto Tamayo Lizarraga. He was magnetic. Neighbor described him as charming, confident, and hard to ignore. Many women noticed him, but with Gloria, something different happened. Their connection was immediate. Over time, it deepened, and soon, they became a couple. For Gloria, it felt like the start of a new chapter, one filled with hope. After years of struggle, after marrying Thomas, Gloria's life settled into a new rhythm. Together, they built a blended family filled with energy and love, eventually welcoming 4 more children, including twins in 2017. With 7 children to care for, Gloria embraced a busy, vibrant household, driven by her relentless determination to support her family and give them the life she had always dreamed of. Gloria's entrepreneurial spirit never faded. Around the time her twins were born, she came up with a new idea, one that merged passion with purpose, building a meaningful presence on social media. Fitness had always been central to her life. After her last pregnancy, facing new challenges with her body and identity, she made a bold choice. Instead of hiding, she would share her journey. Gloria began uploading videos to digital platforms, short routines, honest advice, and motivational messages aimed at mothers learning to love and care for their bodies again. At first, the response was minimal. Most views came from men, not the women she hoped to inspire. But Gloria stayed consistent. Day after day, she showed up, committed to building something authentic. Slowly, things began to shift. Her words started reaching the right people. Women who saw themselves in her story. Women searching for strength, hope, and understanding. Step by step, Gloria grew into a fitness influencer. Her videos gained traction, her following expanded frile, and eventually she amassed more than 165,000 followers. To her audience, she wasn't just a trainer, she was an inspiration. By early 2025, at the age of 40, Gloria began to dream bigger. Her digital success had opened doors, but she craved deeper connection and greater impact. That was when she met Hector Garduno. Like Gloria, he was deeply committed to health and wellness. A father of 4 daughters and a few years her senior, Hector was known for his integrity and dedication. Their bond formed quickly, rooted in mutual admiration, respect, and a shared vision that was both personal and professional. With Hector's support, Gloria's confidence grew. By says, she began teaching fitness classes at a local gym, where clients were drawn not only to her techniques, but to her story of resilience. Together, she and Hector dreamed of opening a gym of their own. In mid-2025, Gloria took another bold step. She joined a podcast centered on female empowerment, offering women a platform to speak openly about trauma, healing, and transformation. In episode 18, she spoke with unflinching honesty about becoming a teenage mother, her cancer diagnosis, the collapse of her first marriage, and the lack of support she endured from family. But in a later episode, released on June 16, Gloria revealed something that shocked her followers. Behind the smiling videos and uplifting posts, she confessed she had been living a silent battle. She described the emotional abuse she endured, how it eroded her daily, chipping away at her confidence, making her feel small and unworthy. Her story made a deep impression. Listeners saw her not as an influencer, but as a survivor. Her openness reminded the world that even the strongest voices often carry hidden scars, and that healing begins when we speak our truth. Gloria had reached a turning point. She no longer wanted to live in silence. She wanted her children to witness courage, not fear. By exposing her toxic marriage publicly, she hoped to inspire women everywhere to break free. But that same act of courage may have set in motion a devastating chain of events. 5 days later, on Saturday, June 21, Gloria went out to dinner at a sushi restaurant in a busy shopping center. She wasn't alone. Hector was with her. The evening seemed ordinary, casual conversation, laughter, and talk of their shared goals. But at 9:40 p.m., just as they walked toward the parking lot, everything shattered. A man appeared suddenly, moving fast. Without a word, he raised a gun and opened fire. First at Hector, then at Gloria. The attack was brutal, deliberate, and over in seconds. As the shooter tried to flee, an off-duty police officer nearby heard the gunfire. He intercepted the suspect in his vehicle, ordering him to stop. Instead of surrendering, the man resisted violently. A shootout erupted. Within moments, the attacker was fatally wounded. When authorities confirmed his identity, the community was stunned. The gunman was none other than Thomas Alberto Tamayo, Gloria's estranged husband. Meanwhile, paramedics rushed to aid Gloria and Hector. Both were transported to a nearby hospital, but their injuries were catastrophic. Despite every medical effort, neither survived. News of the tragedy spread within hours. Headlines dominated social media feeds. Gloria's name trended as thousands of people expressed disbelief, grief, and outrage. Her followers reposted clips of her smiling, encouraging others, and urging women to find their strength, turning her digital legacy into a memorial of resilience. What stunned many was the timing. Just days earlier, Gloria had spoken publicly about her painful divorce. She had revealed the abuse, the struggle, and her choice to finally walk away. For some, this was more than a tragedy. It felt like a crime foretold. Many began calling it by its name, femicide. As investigators dug deeper, disturbing details about Gloria's marriage to Thomas surfaced. Tension had reportedly existed since the birth of their first child. Arguments over money gave way to deeper fractures. Gloria worked multiple jobs to keep the family afloat. While Thomas showed little interest in contributing, she tried to balance work, children, and a household. But he remained detached. One constant source of conflict was order. Gloria craved cleanliness and structure, something Thomas rarely respected. But the breaking point came when she confided her dream of creating fitness videos for mothers. Still recovering from giving birth to twins, she felt insecure about her body and hoped her content might inspire others. Instead of supporting her, Thomas mocked her. He belittled her appearance, sneered at her stretch marks, and told her no one would care. His words weren't protective. They were meant to silence. For a time, she listened. She doubted herself, shelved the project, and carried his cruelty like a weight. But her daughters encouraged her to try again. Their belief in her reignited the fire Thomas had tried to extinguish. In the days following her death, Gloria's oldest daughter became the family's voice. Through heartbreak, she spoke with clarity and strength about missing her mother, about expecting her to walk through the door as if nothing had happened, and about the unbearable emptiness that lingered. She promised to stay strong, for her siblings, for her grandmother, for everyone Gloria had left behind. Rumors quickly spread that Hector had been Gloria's romantic partner. Her daughter corrected the record. That night at the sushi restaurant, they weren't on a date. They were concluding a work meeting, finalizing plans for the gym they dreamed of opening. Gloria's mother later revealed that Thomas had a troubling past, one marked by obsession. He stalked Gloria, followed Gloria after work, and made chilling threats. In her words, he was a man who would do anything to destroy Gloria. In the aftermath of her murder, the community came together to support the children she left behind. A GoFundMe campaign was launched, describing Gloria as a radiant soul, a motivator, and a loving mother whose life was stolen in a senseless act of violence. Donation poured in quickly, raising more than $25,000 in just a few days to help her 7 children, ages ranging from 8 to 24. And to cover funeral costs, Hector's family also started a fundraiser. His daughters described him as a devoted father and a hard-working man who loved deeply and lived with purpose. His death left behind an unfillable void in their lives. But while many showed compassion, social media soon became a battleground. Thousands demanded justice for Gloria, but others rushed to defend Thomas. Some called him a loyal husband, a dedicated father, and a provider who had spent decades building a family. More disturbingly, there were voices that blamed Gloria herself. They claimed she provoked him, accused her of humiliating him, and even suggested she should have behaved more modestly. It was a dark wave of online misogyny, trying to rationalize the violence she endured. Videos soon surfaced from people who claimed to know Thomas personally. Some accused Gloria of being the abuser, pointing to an alleged domestic violence complaint filed earlier in the year. They insisted Thomas had given her everything she wanted, yet nothing was ever enough. Some even alleged that Gloria and Hector mocked him publicly, suggesting that repeated humiliation had pushed him over the edge. Meanwhile, investigators uncovered chilling details. Days before the murder, Thomas had begun tracking Gloria's movements. He allegedly installed a GPS device on her car, monitoring her in real time. On the night of the attack, he followed her, hiding in the shadows for nearly an hour. He knew she was with Hector. He knew where they were, and he knew exactly what he planned to do. Police later speculated that his rampage might not have ended at the restaurant, that he may have intended to go after Gloria's children next. And yet, beyond all the noise, beyond every narrative spun online, one undeniable truth remains: 11 children lost their parents that night. Their sources of love, guidance, and protection were stolen in an instant. That is the deepest tragedy of this story. Gloria's eldest son described life with Thomas in stark terms: a living hell. To outsiders, Thomas projected the image of a respectable, supportive stepfather. But behind closed doors, it was different. The older daughters admitted they had long disliked him. They saw through his mask. In public, Thomas was charming, polished, almost princely. At home, he was controlling, narcissistic, obsessed with appearances. He told people he provided for the household. But in truth, it was Gloria who worked tirelessly, managing finances, caring for children, and holding everything together. After her last pregnancy, Gloria underwent reconstructive surgery to remove excess skin. Yet Thomas boasted to friends that he had paid for it, as if her transformation were his accomplishment. In the final year of her life, the contrast between them widened. As Gloria grew professionally, amassing followers, selling fitness products, and finding her voice, Thomas grew resentful. His ridicule escalated. He undermined her looks, her career, her self-worth. Bit by bit, she withdrew emotionally, no longer respecting him. By early 2025, she told him she was finished with the marriage. After 15 years of enduring his control, she wanted out. She was no longer willing to wait. On a cold January afternoon in Georgia, the quiet of a small family home is shattered by a horrifying discovery. In the woods behind them, Alana Callahan lies motionless, covered in blood, her life brutally taken. But what haunts everyone is more than the violence of the scene. It's the presence of a familiar face, Aaron Schmidt, Alana's best friend, who claims to have witnessed the entire incident. He points to the body, insisting that he's just warded off a mysterious attacker dressed in black. But as investigators piece together the puzzle, Aaron's story and the crime scene begin to diverge in terrifying ways. Who really killed Alana Callahan? And why is a trusted friend at the center of the darkest suspicion? In 2011, Alana Callahan was a 14-year-old student living in Harlem, Georgia. Her family had moved there shortly before a tragic incident. Her father served in the military, and she was one of 4 siblings who were known to be friendly and tightly bonded. After relocating, Alana quickly made friends with local teenagers, and they all began attending church, gaining support from the community. Alana was viewed as a positive, well-adjusted girl who was focused on her studies and aspired to become a lawyer. Sadly, her dreams would not come to fruition. On January 31, 2011, the weather was cold. Alana attended school as usual, and her older sister, Amanda, planned to meet her at the bus stop later. Alana arrived home at 3:32 p.m. and immediately went online. At 3:45 p.m., Amanda left to pick up their younger brother, Chase, who missed the first bus. When Amanda returned home shortly after, she noticed something unusual. Next to Alana's shoes in the entryway were a pair of men's boots belonging to Aaron Schmidt, a family friend. The back sliding door was wide open, which was strange given the chilly January weather. Inside, Alana's computer chair was knocked over, and Amanda spotted red drops on the floor that she initially thought were soda. However, Alana was nowhere to be found. When Amanda called for Alana and received no reply, she felt a sense of unease. Seeing bright red stains on the wall near the computer heightened her concern, and she began to feel panicked. Chase also walked in and was immediately alarmed by the strange situation. While Amanda was trying to understand what was happening, Alana's best friend, 14 years old, Aaron Schmidt, rushed into the house. He was well known to the family. He came in from the backyard, shouting that he had seen a man in black attack Alana inside the house and then drag her into the woods through the back door. He claimed he scared the attacker away, but said Alana was hurt and needed urgent help. Amanda and her younger brother Chase quickly went to the forest, following Aaron's calls. Aaron pointed out a body on the ground, but at first, no one else could see it. As they walked a short distance, they found Alana lying on the ground, covered in blood. Chase and Amanda immediately tried to help her, but she showed no signs of life. Amanda called 911 for assistance, and the operator provided instructions for cardiopulmonary resuscitation, but nothing worked. Alana remained unresponsive. Law enforcement officers arrived on the scene within minutes of the incident and attempted to help Alana, who had been shot in the head. Paramedics arrived shortly thereafter but only confirmed that she had died. The sheriff acted quickly, sending police officers to search for the unknown attacker Aaron described, along with 2 dog teams. Detectives also began interviewing the first witnesses at the crime scene, particularly Aaron, who claimed to have seen the attacker and was acting oddly. When the police arrived, they found Amanda with blood on her hands from attempting to aid Alana, while Aaron had bloodstains only on the collar of his shirt and on his shorts. Despite claiming he got his clothes dirty helping Alana, his hands were clean, raising doubts among the detectives. Amanda was the first to be questioned. She recounted everything she had seen before finding Alana dead. Noting that Aaron was the last person to see Alana alive and the only one who had witnessed the attacker, Amanda mentioned that Aaron was not only Alana's best friend, but also a close family friend. He visited their home almost daily after school, and they often shared meals together. Amanda noted that Aaron had come from the woods where he found Alana, but she didn't hear any gunshots, which was strange. Aaron stated he tried to help Alana before calling Amanda and ended up throwing up. Initially, Amanda didn't suspect him of wrongdoing, as she had no reason to believe he would attack her sister. However, she pointed out inconsistencies in his account, which made her a key witness for the detectives. Amanda and Chase realized that Aaron shouldn't have been able to see Alana's body from where he claimed to see it. The area was blocked by thick bushes, which had already been checked by them. The detectives confirmed this information. Furthermore, while Amanda was on the phone with 911, Aaron touched Alana's body and made a peculiar comment, suggesting he was worried the police would think he was responsible for her death. This behavior raised suspicions. The medical examiner later reported that Alana had been shot in the head with a fatal wound that damaged vital arteries. The bullet was found in the living room of the house where the attack occurred, indicating that the killer had dragged Alana outside right after the shooting, resulting in minimal blood being left inside. During her discussions with law enforcement, Amanda did not appear suspicious. She was genuinely upset about her sister's death, crying as she shared her feelings. In contrast, Aaron seemed unusually calm and detached when discussing Alana's death, which raised further suspicion. Realizing how calm he was acting, he suddenly began to cry. But one of the detectives noticed he had no real tears and was merely rubbing his eyes, as if trying to fake his distress. Witnesses reported that Alana's family quickly became friends with Aaron after moving into their neighborhood in May 2010. Though he was known to have behavioral issues and a rebellious streak, no one perceived him as dangerous until a specific incident occurred. He was generally friendly and calm, which made it easy for Alana and her family to connect with him. They spoke often, and Aaron began visiting their home nearly every day. Amanda noticed Aaron acting strangely after Alana died. She thought it was unreasonable for him to worry about his fingerprints on Alana's body. A psychiatrist from the sheriff's office interviewed Aaron and reviewed the case details, concluding that his concern about fingerprints indicated guilt, leading the psychiatrist to believe he had a role in the crime. After questioning Amanda, detectives spoke with Aaron. Aaron, a 14-year-old high school student, lived with his older half-sister in Harlem, Georgia, right next to Alana's family. Aaron claimed that he returned home from school an hour early on the day of the murder and, despite the bad weather, went straight home instead of waiting at the bus stop for his friends. Knowing Alana would be home soon, he walked to her house. As he approached, he noticed a man in black jump inside, heard a loud bang, and saw a person dragging a girl into the nearby woods. Aaron chased after them, hoping to help Alana, but arrived too late. Afterward, he was so shaken that he vomited. When Amanda returned home, Aaron ran inside to explain what had happened and to call for assistance. However, Amanda and others questioned Aaron's account. Alana had no known enemies fitting his description, and the details of the alleged attacker were vague. Aaron described the person as a white male in his 30s, but couldn't provide any identifying features and thought he might be a burglar. Remarkably, several valuable electronics were missing from Alana's home, but there were no signs of forced entry. The family wasn't sure if the items were taken on the day of the murder. They believed they might have gone missing earlier. Aaron claimed he had seen the car used by the attacker. He said that when he ran toward Alana, the killer fled in a white pickup truck parked off a forest path. Even with suspicions growing, detectives didn't rush to conclusions due to Aaron's young age of 14. They initially attributed the inconsistencies in his story to the stress he was under. However, as the questioning continued, his narrative became increasingly muddled. Detectives grew more suspicious when they discovered that Aaron and Alana had briefly dated. Adults believed that he fell in love when Aaron first met her family, but their romantic involvement lasted only a few days. After a church service, where the pastor advised Alana that she was too young for a relationship, she told Aaron she wanted to end things due to the pastor's influence and her age. A few months later, Alana was dead, which raised concerns about Aaron's motives. Search teams with tracking dogs scoured the area around the crime scene, but found no evidence that matched Aaron's description. There were no tire tracks from the white pickup truck he mentioned. The dogs repeatedly returned to the body and then headed toward her home, suggesting that the only people present at the crime scene were Aaron, Amanda, and Alana. A forensic examination determined that Alana was shot with a .22 caliber pistol, the same type that was in her home. Alana's parents own a handgun and a pistol in the bedroom, but have forbidden other family members from entering the room or using any type of gun. The pistol was found in its usual location in the bedroom and sent for ballistics testing, which revealed that Alana had indeed been shot with a different gun. Further testing confirmed suspicions when gunpowder residue was found on Aaron's hands. He claimed that just days before the incident, he and Alana's family had set up an impromptu shooting range and had used Alana's parents' pistol. However, the family rejected this story, as they never permitted teenagers to engage in such dangerous activities. Nonetheless, Aaron's statement gave investigators useful information. It showed that he was aware of the firearms in Alana's house and suggested he might be trying to cover up his involvement with a lie. Additionally, the gunpowder residue was too fresh to have come from an event several days prior, indicating that Aaron would have had to wash his hands multiple times to remove it. When detectives confronted Aaron about their suspicions, it denied shooting Alana. Despite sticking to his story, it began to sound increasingly implausible. Now, he claimed that upon seeing a stranger get into a pickup truck, he ran toward it to see the license plate, but instead stumbled upon a gun a few meters from Alana's body. He said he took the gun and tossed it into the bushes in the forest. Interestingly, the gun was discovered exactly where Aaron indicated. His account included details not previously released to the public, leading detectives to suspect he was trying to adjust his lies to fit the facts that had emerged during the investigation. Further ballistics analysis confirmed that the bullet that killed Alana was fired from the gun found in the forest, which contained only Aaron's fingerprints and no other evidence. Suddenly, he remembered that the real killer must have worn gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. As the interrogation progressed, it was evident that Aaron was becoming increasingly anxious, and police confidence grew that they would soon break him. After several hours, even Aaron realized he couldn't outsmart the detectives, no matter how much he altered his story to match new evidence. Eventually, he expressed a wish to confess. Aaron claimed that the shooting was an accident. He said that when Amanda left to pick up Chase, he went to visit Alana, knowing she was afraid of guns. He attempted to play a prank. He entered the house quietly through the unlocked door, removed his shoes, and approached without her noticing. He picked up the gun but did not realize it was loaded. Sneaking up behind her, he pointed the gun at the back of her head and accidentally pulled the trigger. When asked where he got the gun, he could not answer. Panicking, he planned to stage an attack by an unknown assailant and dragged Alana's body, which still showed signs of life, into the woods. By the time he left her on the ground, Amanda had returned home. Hearing Amanda's car, Aaron felt frightened, but he decided to continue with his charade. By the time of his confession, he had undergone over 4 hours of questioning and provided detectives with 27 different versions of events surrounding Alana's murder, none of which matched the evidence collected during the investigation. Consequently, Aaron Schmidt, who was 14 years old, was charged with the murder of 14-year-old Alana and faced additional charges. He was arrested and spent the next 2 years in a juvenile detention center. A background check revealed that Aaron had no criminal record and had never been involved in any illegal activities prior to this incident. He did not attend Harlem School. Instead, he was enrolled at Grovetown, a school for children and adolescents with behavioral issues. His friends and family had not observed any violent behavior in him. When detectives interviewed the principal of his school, he confirmed that Aaron struggled with learning, which is why he transferred to a different institution. However, he did not provide details about the specific difficulties Aaron faced. Investigators believe that Aaron, unable to handle rejection from Alana, a girl he had a crush on, attacked her after she refused to date him. They also considered the possibility of an attempted kidnapping, but Alana resisted, leading to her being shot during a struggle. Alana's family observed that Aaron's behavior became more and more suspicious after Alana rejected his advances. About a week before the murder, Aaron entered their home while the family was away. Alana discovered him inside when she returned from school, and she was both surprised and alarmed to find the front door unlocked. Alana's mother follows her home and suspects Aaron of breaking in. When she inquired about how he got inside, he claimed the door was simply unlocked. The family doubted his statement, as they always locked their door when leaving. Subsequently, Alana's mother had a serious conversation with Aaron, informing him that he could not visit unless one of her parents was home and that he was not allowed over before 5 p.m. Alana's parents also stressed that the entire family knew that their father kept a shotgun and a handgun in his bedroom. The others were not allowed to enter the room or touch the weapons. They also never talked about it with outsiders, not even Aaron. The fact that Aaron was aware of the firearms heightened the family's fears. This knowledge suggested that he had previously been in the house alone and had carefully examined the location of their belongings. During a search of Aaron's home, police discovered a gun case identical to the one containing the firearm found in the woods. Along with ammunition and an owner's manual, this evidence indicated that he had purchased the gun himself. Yet he insisted he acquired it only after the crime, out of fear that the unknown individual would come after him for being a witness. It was clear that a 14-year-old could not have purchased a firearm in the short time between the crime and his arrest. Ballistics confirmed that this gun was indeed the one used to kill Alana, reinforcing suspicions that he had premeditated the crime. Furthermore, police found various items belonging to Alana's family in Aaron's bedroom, including expensive electronics and an iPod. In his family's pickup truck, they found a duplicate key to Alana's house hidden under the floor mat, which had been made without her family's permission. Alana's family was shocked to discover how dangerous Aaron had become, especially since they had trusted him. He had manipulated the situation, keeping the key to their home a secret, which allowed him free access to their lives. Following the charges of first-degree murder, Aaron also faced charges of theft and unlawful possession of a firearm used in the crime. There were suspicions that he had stolen the gun rather than purchased it legally. Aaron denied all charges against him. Given the severity of the crime, prosecutors sought to try him as an adult, while his attorney argued for the case to be handled in the juvenile justice system, considering his age at the time of the murder. Ultimately, based on state laws, the judge ruled that Aaron would be tried as an adult due to the gravity of the offense. In 2012, when the accused, Aaron, turned 15, The hearings commenced. His attorney had consistently sought to have the case moved to the juvenile justice system, but was not successful. Prosecutors argued that the attack stemmed from Alana's refusal to date Aaron. He maintained that the crime was premeditated, and that Aaron had gone to great lengths to conceal his actions, even exploiting Alana's family's trust to steal their valuables. Evidence indicated that Aaron had planned the crime and had attempted to mislead investigators and those close to Alana. Detectives noted that he displayed no emotion during interrogations or at the crime scene. He attempted to cry when suspicions were first directed at him, but it was unconvincing, making him appear even more suspicious. Amanda and Chase tried to assist Alana before the paramedics arrived, while they observed Aaron standing calmly nearby. Detached from the situation, the defense attorney attempted to present Aaron as a victim, claiming he came from a dysfunctional family that subjected him to cruelty and aggression from a young age. He argued that Alana's rejection caused emotional damage to Aaron. However, there was no evidence to support claims of past violence against him, which seemed like a desperate effort to elicit sympathy from the jury. In contrast, the prosecution was assertive and relied on concrete evidence. The prosecutor introduced a substantial amount of evidence, including a gun found in the woods near Alana's body. Ballistics confirmed that she had been shot with this gun, and Aaron's fingerprints were found on the handle, with no other traces. Testimonies from dog handlers indicated that no traces of strangers were found in the house, nor any sense of other individuals at the crime scene. Witnesses from Alana's family, including Amanda and Chase, who had previously met Aaron, testified about his suspicious behavior, noting their confusion and horror. Despite this, Aaron maintained his innocence. The defense even attempted to suggest that there was another attacker who fatally harmed Alana but was thwarted by Aaron, escaping without a trace. However, this claim seemed implausible. Aaron's accounts changed frequently during questioning. At one point, he admitted to using a gun and accidentally firing it, but the investigation disproved this, as it required significant force to operate the trigger effectively. Given his physical description, it was deemed unlikely that he could have fired it accidentally. Ultimately, none of the 27 different accounts given by him were credible. The prosecutor suggested that the motive for the crime stemmed from Aaron's anger over Alana's rejection. He had hoped to pursue a romantic relationship with her, but her refusal drove him to seek revenge. Stole a gun, made a copy of a key to the house, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. That day turned tragic for Alana. Noticing she was home alone, he took the opportunity to attack. After shooting her, he heard Amanda arriving and attempted to conceal the body in the woods. But he failed to hide his actions effectively and became increasingly agitated as he tried to evade capture. By the end of February 2012, the jury had listened to arguments from both parties and began their deliberation on the verdict. On March 9, 2012, Aaron Schmidt was found guilty of first-degree murder, possession of a firearm used in the murder, and theft. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole for the murder. Additionally, he was sentenced to 5 years for possession, to be served consecutively, and another 10 years for theft, which would be served concurrently with the life sentence. This outcome brought relief to Alana's family, who had consistently warned journalists to be cautious and not to trust individuals, even if they were minors. After a Supreme Court ruling, Aaron's sentence was enforced in 2015 when he was transferred to the state prison in Hayes. Since then, he has made multiple attempts to appeal the verdict. His lawyer tried to have the case reviewed under juvenile justice laws to reduce the sentence significantly, but these efforts have not been successful. As a result, he is still in prison.